Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time out on this very cold Joburg afternoon for joining this session. I am Mandisa from the Gauteng branch of the Business Women's Association. I head up the events portfolio. I come this afternoon with greetings from our chairperson, Nola Mashaba, our committee member, Sophie Masipa, who's also joining us in this session. And I thank you for taking time out this afternoon to be part of this very important workshop. We have partnered with Hyber Group South Africa, who have allowed us to enroll a very impactful Women's Month program that we kicked off on the 4th of this month with Mrs. Trudie Nichols, with the intent of inspiring women in business and in entrepreneurship and allowing them that even in these times of COVID, where everything is uphill, we still have a charge and a role to play in the industries that we participate in. Last week, we also hosted a series of masterclasses with the intent of allowing women who are operating in different sectors to be able to get some tips and hints on how to better themselves and better their businesses. Today, very importantly, is a conversation that we're having in partnership with the Directors Association. The conversation is about how we can change what the status of boardrooms in South Africa look like, how we can ensure that women take a seat at the table. We are on the eve of the anniversary of the historic Beijing conference. This year on the 1st of October is the 25th anniversary of the Beijing conference. South Africa needs to acknowledge that not much has been done and happened in the area of economic emancipation. Currently, women make up more than 50% of the population. 45% of us are economically active, but only about 20% of us actually occupy board seats on JSE listed companies. We do acknowledge that our current government has made many strides to ensure that legislation is in place, but however, as women, we need to know that the opportunities are there, and we need to know that we are responsible for ensuring that we are able to turn the tide. The Directors Association has done immeasurable work in this area of ensuring that we are able to increase board participation to 40%. But while we sit at 20%, we need to ready ourselves, we need to prepare ourselves so that when the opportunity comes, you are able to take it with both hands. So without further ado, I hope that today's session will shed light on how us as women are able to not just sit on boards, but we can also be able to influence strategy and make meaningful differences in SOEs, JSE listed companies, and the companies where we occupy those seats. So I will introduce you to our esteemed guest this evening, and we thank the Directors Association for partnering with us in giving this knowledge, because I think for myself, thinking about a few years back, when I thought about being a board member, I thought it's something very complicated and I don't qualify. And some of us exclude ourselves from participating because we lack the knowledge of how do we participate, how do we get involved, how do we ready ourselves. So I'd like to introduce you to our guest this evening, who will take you through the various topics in the workshop. Quickly, before we hand over to that part, just a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphone off throughout the whole session unless it's your turn to speak. Please use the chat box and the Q&A for any questions that you will feel throughout the session. I think using the Q&A section is very important, because at times you may have a question for Munya, but you find that someone in the chat box already has an answer for you. So please feel free to ask questions. We will ensure that we field them through to our panelists and ensure that all your questions are answered throughout the session. The session is yours. We are here for you for 3 hours. It's your session. Use it to ask all the questions that you have. Use it to interact with the panelists and ensure that you leave at the end of this 3 hours feeling empowered, feeling recharged, feeling that, yes, you can actually take that seat in that company you've been eyeing for the past few years. So without further ado, I will hand over to Munya Duvera, who is the founder and chairperson of the Directors Association. We also have Trudie Nichols, who is a board member and also is an attorney and currently is with Bowman's law firm. And we also have on the panel Charmaine Soobramoney, who will talk to us on how to create your director brand. Because yes, it's a good thing that you are a director and you're sitting on a board, but which board is suitable for you? Which board is suitable for you as a person and your purpose, and how do you create that brand for yourself? So without further ado, I'll hand over to Munya, who will kick off this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandisa, and thank you for having us. Thank you for the invite. We're really excited to be part of your Women's Month agenda, your calendar, your events that you've put together. So I really appreciate you inviting us and partnering us as well with what we are trying to achieve in the director market, especially from a female perspective. So what I have today for our audience, I've prepared a presentation. I'm going to speak around how to become a board member and just touch a little bit on some of the functions and what to look forward to being a board member, and really how you can navigate yourself to finding a board seat, from doing the right training, finding the right board seat for yourself, what it is to sit on a board, types of committees, and all those other stuff that is important. And then my colleagues, Trudie and Charmaine, will also speak on other matters. So I'm just going to share my screen so that we can. There we go. So as Mandisa said, please ask questions, write them in the chat box, and then at the end of my presentation, I'll be able just to go over them and cover as much questions as you might have asked. I will speak for about 45 minutes or 40 minutes, and then the last 10 or 15 minutes until 5 o'clock, I'll just open up the floor for questions, discussion, debate, comment, etc., so that we can all learn from each other. Because I do know that there are some fantastic ladies in the audience that do sit on boards, and your experience and what you've been through could be very helpful to us and everyone else in the audience. So let me start by just giving a brief of who Directors Association is. And essentially, we're an independent professional body that educates, equips, and places directors on various boards across the country. And as a professional body, our mandate is to continuously educate our members. And that's key for us, to continuously educate our members in all things governance related, so that they are kept abreast of what is going on in the board market, so that they can be efficient on the board. As well as that, it is to create opportunities for our board members, through board placements, through networking, and all other services that we provide. But importantly for today, and what we're discussing, I want to focus more on our Madam Chair initiative. And this really is the arm of Directors Association that focuses on females. This is our most important objective as Directors Association, to ensure that there's an increase of women participation on boards. So it's a division of Directors Association. It's called Madam Chair, and its sole focus is on females. And these are some of the objectives: increase female boards, increase female representation on boards, create a pipeline of board-ready female director candidates, develop female leaders through our Take the Lead initiative, which is part of what we're discussing today, and our theme for August month, Women's Month rather, and maintain a network of diverse women in business, politics, corporate, whilst providing them a platform to network, etc. So what have we done in the director markets to ensure that women get an equal opportunity to sit on boards? And I think the most notable item is our a petition that we sent to Parliament, asking them to legislate the requirement for a minimum percentage of females on boards. And I think this is very important, because for us to change the status quo, what has been on the boards, I think we need legislation to come into play. And last week I had an interview with Faith Kanyele, who's a board member of the JSE, and she agreed in that the legislation has to come in and do something around increasing females on boards, because leaving it to the free market, to the open market, hasn't worked. We still sit on 19%, 20%, and we've been sitting on these numbers for over 10, 15 years. So approaching Parliament was something that we considered very well. It's been done in some European countries with great effect and great success. And essentially, we said to them, look, why don't you put in the Companies Act? Because the Companies Act is a document that is the foundation for companies, right? And we'll talk a bit about the Companies Act a bit later on, and we'll find that it is the one that stipulates the rules around how companies should operate, boards and directors. So having such a rule in the Companies Act would be fantastic in ensuring that females get a fair opportunity to sit on the board. So it's in Parliament right now. We sent it to them last year around this time, actually. This is the letter that they gave us in response to that request of ours. Hopefully in the next couple of years, this will come into effect. And if it does, the importance out of that would be the increase of females on boards. And for us to achieve that, what is important now is to ensure that we have the numbers. We have the women that will be ready to sit on these boards. So here's a question that I was asked through a lot of people that we spoke of around introducing a 40% quota. The question rather was, can the current market satisfy a 40% quota? And that is definitely no, meaning that right now there are not enough board-ready women to satisfy a 40% a quota on listed boards, on public sector boards, and most definitely not on SME boards. So therefore, for us to be able to satisfy this 40%, there needs to be an extensive training and equipping exercise. And that is something that we have embarked on ever since 2018. We've really dug into training and equipping women to be board ready, so that when this 40% is passed, and we're very hopeful that it will pass, we're very confident that it can pass in the next 2, 3, 4 years maybe, we'll have a good pipeline of board ready women that can then sit and serve on these boards. So these are some of the trainings that we've been doing over the past couple of years with some of our partners, such as IBM. IBM is a very good sponsor of ours. They provide us with venues such as these. And hopefully, very soon, hopefully we'll be able to go back and have such trainings, after this COVID-19 pandemic. But IBM definitely has been a good part of us, and other partners such as WD Investment Holdings, who provide us with other resources, because they also have the same objective to ensure that females are increased in the boardroom. And what is the objective at the end of the day for us is this database. And this is something that we're really working towards, to have a database that is filled with women that have been trained, that are board ready, that can be placed on specific boards based on the size of the organization, based on the experience of that candidate, based on the revenue, technicality, industry, etc. So this female directed database is going to be something that's very, very important, because the question I always get asked, and many of my colleagues get asked, is where do we find these women? Yes, Munya, we want to increase. Yes, we want to put more women on board. Where do we find them? So what we've decided to do is, let's create a central place, a central database, where any organization, be it public sector, private sector, listed organization, even internationally, can go to and look for whichever type of candidate they're looking for. And we wanted to be so specific to the individual's experience, as I said, their industry, be it they're in the beginner stage or their elite stage, the types of boards they like, etc. So this will be launched. We're looking to launch this probably in October. Our partners are getting on board, and we're almost finished setting this whole thing up, which would be really fantastic in our objective. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction on who the association is, what we're trying to do, and I'll throw some questions a bit later on if anyone has around that. But what I want to speak about now is why we should be non-executive director. What is the benefit of it? What does it give you? How do you get on a board? What does a board look like? Etc. etc. So why be a non-executive director? And there are a couple of reasons. And here I've listed a couple of reasons why anyone would and should desire to be a board member. And for me, the most important one is it's a secondary career. If you really think about it, you've got your main career, be it an entrepreneur, working in corporate, government, etc. And if you plan it correctly, a boardship can be a fantastic secondary career, right? That you can really grow from, that you can really grow your professional career as well, which is the second point there, that it's an opportunity to grow a professional career. And something I asked Faith Kanyele when I had the interview with her, I said to her, has sitting on boards has helped you grow your professional career? She said, absolutely. The people she's met, the experience that she's gained, she would not have been where she is today if she had not sat on boards. So there's a great advantage of sitting on a board, because you can grow your professional career. You can effect change. One of the biggest things that you can do on a board is effect change. I think we all know that decisions are made at the top, right? Company policy, how businesses run, the rules, regulations, etc., are made at board level. So if you have a grievance with anything in society, anything our organization is doing, whatever they're doing, go on the board and go change it, right? Broaden your expertise, the fourth point. you want to gain that experience, you want to open your eyes to other opportunities, etc., sit on a board. You will be open, you will see so many different skill sets, meet different people, different understanding, experience, which just help you grow your expertise. And obviously contribute on the highest level of leadership. And then one of the favorite ones as well is a secondary revenue stream. You can earn a decent amount of money sitting on boards. I know a lot of people actually use boards as kind of like their pension retirement plan. If that's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with it. But yes, you can earn a bit of money on the board. You can earn a lot of money on the board actually if you get to the really big boards, if we start talking about listed boards, etc. And then contacts, grow your network. As you meet people, you're going to meet different people from different industries who can assist you in your endeavors, and you can grow your network, your professional network, as I said earlier on. And then there are business opportunities as well. Now, one of the things about being a director is there's a lot of ethical items around sitting on a board. And you will find that when we discuss a lot of boardships, and especially during our program, which I'll speak to about later, there's a lot around ethical conduct. And whenever I put the slide up and I talk about business opportunities, I know a lot of people always wonder then, what type of business opportunities are we talking about? Especially in this time when there's a lot of scrutiny on directors, from state-owned entities, listed, etc. Because one of the things that we all look to do when we sit on our board is, if we're an entrepreneur, to grow our businesses. So here's a question to the audience, and maybe someone can answer this later on when we open up to the floor. Is it ethical, do you think, or is it unethical if a board member, or should a board member get business or contracts from the organization that they're sitting on, right? So you're serving on a board, XYZ Steel. XYZ Steel is looking for someone who can distribute their steel. You happen to have a trucking company, you got the distribution lines, warehouses, etc. Is it ethical? Is it right for a board member who sits on that organization to get that contract? So these are some of the things that also come up when we start talking about boardship, because opportunities do come up, but then there's a certain ethicalness and certain structures and a certain way we need to do things that applies as well. So I'd like someone to answer that for me later on. Then we can have a discussion around that. And then finally, exposure to different industries, opportunities, meet new people, meet different people with different expertise, etc. So 2020 director. Who is the 2020 director? Well, now we're talking about the new director. That is what we at Directors Association are trying to create, the new director. And what is the new director? Simple. An expert in their field and generally understands the areas of the business. So what do we mean by that? Gone are the days where you can have a board member who is purely an expert in their field and knows nothing else outside of that. So 10, 15, 20 years ago, you sit in a boardroom when the chief financial officer is speaking, the rest of us are quiet because we don't really know what he or she's talking about. We don't really understand finance. When the IT guy starts speaking, we're all quiet because we don't really understand what he or she's talking about. Those days are gone. The new director of today understands the entire business generally. So we're not saying be an expert in our field, that is impossible. But as a director, we expect you to be able to hold a meaningful conversation around all areas of the business. That is your responsibility. That is your fiduciary obligation on shareholders, to be able to be knowledgeable enough so that you can speak around IT. Again, we're not saying be an IT expert, but what we are saying is that make sure you be able, when it's time to discuss around the investment into IT, investment into a new plant, you'll be able to hold a meaningful discussion so that you can vote at the end of the day, voting knowing exactly what you're voting for, because at the end of the day, there is liability that comes with the decisions you make on a board. And if I'm a board member, I would like to make a decision well informed. So therefore, the new director of today has to be an expert in their field, whatever that is, right? Legal, marketing experts, sales, different industries require different experts. Whatever that is, fantastic. And above that, then generally you gotta have general business acumen, right? That's what we're talking about. So that's why in our program that we provide, we don't focus only on the technical and governance aspect of being a board member. We also focus on other areas that every board member should understand. So if you look at point 5 here on the left, there's corporate strategy, right? Every board member should understand strategy and should be able to apply it, should be able to scrutinize it, when the executive team brings the strategy that they've developed, presented, you as a board member must be able to critique it, analyze it, etc., etc. So essentially, these are some of the topics that we cover in our program: Companies Act, reporting, board committees, etc., etc. Or all of them to ensure that you become a holistic board member that understands all the core areas of the business. Now, outside of those, which are more your technical type of knowledge and understanding, you also need to have the soft skills. And I cannot stress this enough: the need to have the soft skills that will allow you to contribute and participate on a board, such as being a team player. A board is a team sport, I like to call it, because it's a group of individuals coming together with the same goal. So if you're able to play well with others, it's going to be very difficult for you to survive and or grow your career. I've seen some extremely gifted, technically competent, intelligent individuals on a board, but because they were rude, because they didn't know how to speak to other people, they didn't go far in their board career, right? Remember, board market is very small, right? And the way board memberships and seats are found is usually through the network and referrals. Now, if people don't like you, they're not going to refer you so much, right, to sit on other boards. So you got to have that ability to play well with others. You got to be confident as well. Where does confidence come from? Number one, it starts with your knowledge. Starts with knowledge. The more you know about how a board functions, the more confident you're going to be to raise issues, to speak up, to raise your points, to object, etc., etc. So what you want to do is to really equip yourself with that understanding of how a board functions, and then obviously using your core expertise, whatever it is, legal, accounting, whatever, to then contribute on the board. And because you know, and because you have got that full knowledge, you will be confident. Professionalism goes without saying. You've got to be professional. You got to get to a board having read your board minutes, having prepared through your board pack, etc., etc. There's no excuse to get to a board meeting and you haven't yet gone over the board, the board pack that's been sent. When the chairperson starts asking us to, certain questions, you're lost because you didn't go through your board pack. Professionalism is key. Leadership goes without saying, and definitely a good communicator. A very important soft skill, an ability to put your point across, right? That's good communication. Because if you're unable to do so, even though you have a good point, if you can't put it across, it won't help. So our program is all cover some of these softer skills, leadership, etc., etc. Then a question I always get is around younger board members, aspiring younger directors. And I would consider a young aspiring director to be between the age of 30 and 45 years old, right? 30 to 45 years. To me, that's kind of a young aspiring director. Why? As well, because if you look at the average age of the JSE listed board members, it's around 55, 56. So if you start your board career at 44, you really got about 10 years or so to actually get to JSE level. So 30 to 45. Is there room for younger directors? Definitely there is. Our company is looking for the younger directors. Definitely there are. All you have to have is that maturity that comes with being a board member. The maturity that's required of a board member. So if you can get to that maturity at the age of 30, fantastic. It's 35, 40. And again, important as well is how long does it take you to become an expert in your field? So if you're a lawyer or a doctor, right, it might take you a bit longer than someone who's in maybe management consulting, strategy, etc. But there is definitely room for younger. And I would actually encourage all the young individuals out there to start their board careers early, because you give yourself enough time to prepare yourself to grow and learn in the board market. You grow your craft, you sharpen your craft, so that by the time the big boards come calling, you already have that knowledge and understanding. Okay, so at the end of the day, it's about what do I bring to the table? And that's really key. What do I, as a board member, bring to the table? Remember, there is not a lot of boards out there, a lot of organizations have boards, and I would say there are a lot more directors that are looking for boardships than there are boards. So at the end of the day, it's a competitive market, and it boils down to what do I, as Munya, bring to this organization? What can I offer? What value can I bring outside of what is required of me? Time requirement is also very important. You must consider and determine, do you have the time to serve on boards, and how many boards? It's very important as well. 2 boards, 3 boards, 4 boards, right? And specifically that's also important is, can I serve on other boards and not jeopardize my current occupation. Because remember at the beginning we said it is a secondary career. So you don't want to sit on too many boards to a point where you're jeopardizing your primary career and vice versa. I'm going to skip some of these slides so that I make sure I go through the meat of this workshop. All right, so again, that was a bit, I'll call that my secondary introduction. So I'm going to talk a bit now about being an actual board member, some of the duties that is required of you, some of the roles that will be required to do, and how to get a board seat, etc. And speak around the MOI, the Companies Act as well. So what is important from us as board members is to really have in-depth knowledge and understanding of our role, of the functions of a board, and specifically the role and responsibility of specific members within the board. And one thing that should be classified, and us as directors should understand, is the difference between the non-executive director and the independent non-exec director. And what it is, it's very simple. Non-exec is an individual who has material interest in the business, which in most cases is holding an equity stake. So generally in the public, when we talk about boardship, we say, I'm a non-executive director, I'm a non-executive director. It's fantastic, that's what we know it as. But when we look at it carefully, and what it is now is that in most cases, we're actually saying we're an independent director. And here's the difference. A non-executive director is an individual who's sitting on a board who has some financial stake, who has equities in the organization in most cases. So if you're a shareholder and you're sitting on a board, you're referred to as a non-executive director, as opposed to an independent director who's also referred to as an outside director, who's a board member that has no material interest in the business, be it shareholding, company affiliation, prior business dealings, family or friend relation, and whose only financial benefit from the organization is their remuneration. And this is what we are trying to create. We're trying to create more of independent directors, individuals that are going to sit on a board without any prior dealings with that organization, no family or friend relation, no financial gain outside of their remuneration. For what purposes? For them to be independent. Because the theory of it is some of the reasons there have been so much debacles in the corporate and even in the state-owned entity boards is because there's been a material interest, there's been something to gain financially and or otherwise on the director's part that caused them not to make the right decision. So independent directors are sought after in the market, and that's what we're creating. Individuals like yourself to go on boards and be the voice of reason, be that independent voice on that board. Now let's talk about the foundation of the director, foundation of a director. And it's very, very simple. This is it. Company, shareholder, director. As a director, your life, your decisions revolve around these three entities, these three items, sorry, not entities. The company itself, the shareholder, and you, the director, / board, etc. And when we discuss directorship, we're really talking around these three elements. But there's a spanner in the works. We introduce stakeholders as well, right? Because in today's society, in today's business environment, the stakeholders have a bigger voice than they had in yesteryear. So being a director now is not only around these three items I spoke of, which are still the main core item, but there's a lot of employee involvement, creditors, stakeholders, I said, customers, suppliers, government, etc. And we as directors then have to make decisions that affect not only the business, but cognizant of how they're affecting stakeholders. That's very key now because we can no longer make decisions on a board that are only shareholder focused, right? We have to consider stakeholders and how any decision we as a board, how is it affecting stakeholders? That's how and when corporate governance and all these items then come into play. So I want to focus though on this, the company, the shareholder, and the director. And to start off that is the entity. What is very important and core as a board member is to understand the type of entity that you're sitting and serving on. Because the entity you're serving on, the type of structure the entity has, dictates the rules around that organization. So in South Africa, these are the kind of entities that we have, right? Listed quite a few of them there. The company itself, which is a PTY, a company again, which is a publicly held business, listed business, and the company is also a non-profit organization. So when we talk about the Companies Act, we're really focusing around the company and the director that is a board member of this company. When we start talking about close corporations and state-owned entities, non-government organizations, community-based organizations, all these other entities have different legislation and rules that govern them. But as directors, we will focus on the Companies Act. So if any of you ever then go and sit on, let's say, a trust, which is registered under the Master of High Court, somewhere there, you will have this specific legislation that governs how a board member or a trustee, rather, is to govern that organization being a trust. So as a board member, one of the things that you always want to do when you go sit on a board is to understand the type of entity that it is. Is it an NPO? Is it an NGO? Is it a listed company? Is it a sole proprietor? Because the rules around how you as a board member can function is determined by the legislation that governs that specific entity. But directors, as we're speaking around them, we're focusing on the Companies Act, which is the most important document that dictates the rules around the company, the shareholder, and the directors. So essentially, the focal point of the Companies Act is these three things, as I've said before. The company itself, the shareholders who theoretically own the company, and directors who direct the company on behalf of shareholders. So I say theoretically because shareholders don't own a company. I know that a lot of people will disagree with now, but I think when we open up that, when we open up questions just now, I might want to ask a few of you, or get some of your inputs on shareholders, whether they own or do not own the company, according to the Companies Act. So remember, everything we do as a director is according to the Companies Act. Any decisions that we make, they must be in accordance with the rules that have been created for us within the Companies Act. So that's really the foundation of us as directors. And I would encourage us that if you ever really go into this directorship career, read the Companies Act as much as you can, right? It's not really a long document, but it will serve you well, because the more knowledgeable you are as a board member, the better you will perform, the more confident you would be, and the better you'll be able to discharge your duties as a director. It'll only help you. As the confidence on a board comes from knowledge. There's no other way. I've seen it many times that those on a board that have more knowledge and they've given themselves to know more, they perform better, and they've got that confidence because they understand what's going on. Now, how are directors elected? Very important question. Now, from a listed perspective, to even a state-owned entity to small business, directors are elected or appointed by shareholders. That is how it's done in all these, be it listed, be it public, be it a small business. Directors are elected or appointed by shareholders. So if it is an organization, like a listed organization, that will have a nominations committee, the nominations committee will look for a number of candidates and they'll vet them, etc., etc. And then they'll say, you know what, we nominate Munya to be a director for the next couple of years. And the process is very simple. At the next annual general meeting, the board will nominate that individual, and then the shareholders will vote to appoint that individual. Even re-elections for some listed companies, actually most listed companies, use a system where on an annual basis, directors must be re-elected. So every AGM, one of the key voting items is to re-elect those directors. And then lastly, directors can be elected by the board if it is written within the company's MOI. So the memorandum of incorporation becomes an extremely important document that governs that organization, that specific organization. So if XYZ in its MOI determines that the board itself can nominate and appoint without having to consult with the shareholders any director, then they can go ahead and do so. How about director removal, right? So you've been appointed, you can also be removed. How? By shareholders. Again, shareholders, through a resolution, it's either shareholders or board meeting, you can be removed. So shareholders can remove you, the board itself can remove you if it is written within the MOI that the board has the power to remove the directors. And an interesting thing to remember is, as directors, you are not an employee. So you cannot go to the CCMA and complain and apply that you've been removed as a director from the organization unless you are an executive director. Because remember, an executive is an employee of the organization, a CEO, CFO. So that is why, and that is how Peter Moyo at Old Mutual was able to go to CCMA and say, I was wrongfully terminated because he's an employee. But a pure director like myself, independent director and exec, if I'm removed by the shareholders, I cannot go to CCMA. Yes, I can take it up with the court and all other issues, but the rules that govern directors are different from what govern employees. Very important to remember. Now, upon election, you've been appointed now as a director. You have now what we call fiduciary obligation. And I'm sure you've heard this term countless of times, fiduciary. So what does it mean? Very simple, very simple. It involves trust, especially with regards to the relationship between a trustee and a beneficiary. You being the trustee, the beneficiary being the shareholder, the directors have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders, and legal obligation of one party to act in the best interest of another. The obligated party is typically a fiduciary, that is someone entrusted with the care of money or property, also called fiduciary obligation. So essentially, when you're appointed a director, you've been given the responsibility to you've been entrusted with shareholders' assets, money, etc., to build them, to take care of them, to grow them on behalf of the shareholders. That makes you a fiduciary, and you've got a fiduciary obligation. And what you hear a lot of times, if you ever read or hear one of these court cases around directors being sued, you hear court talk around fiduciary responsibility, and all he or she will be speaking about is the decisions you made were they in the best interest, of the beneficiary, being the shareholders. So I've got here as well a list of, well, I've got about 10 minutes left, then I'm going to open up for some questions. I'll rush through my last slide. So I've got here a bit of duties and responsibilities of independent directors. So remember we said we want to focus on the independent director, creating and building the independent director. Determine the current position of the organization and thereafter analyze to find reasons for its performance in order to be able to make informed decisions on a way forward, contribute strategically to the growth and sustainability of the organization, give objective criticism by challenging and identifying flaws to the proposed strategy. So in this, we're talking about some of your responsibility as a director. And essentially, in a nutshell, I'm not going to go through the entire lot of the slide, in a nutshell, is your overseeing. It's oversight. The board oversees the entire organization. And you as a director, you'll be given specific responsibilities to, number one, oversee the entire organization, and number two, specific to your skill set. Right? So if you're in the marketing field, or the environmental field, chemical field, the legal field, you will be given responsibilities based on your expertise so that you can give oversight to that area of the business. And then board committees, very important as well. Every board member must serve in a committee, because the purpose of committees is to dissect the work that the board has, cut it into little chunks, and then give it into pods, which we call committees, to deal with in depth as they would not be able to deal with at a board meeting. So I always say it in this way, that at a board meeting, that's where decisions are made. Committees is where the hard work is done. That's where the committees is where they really grind, find solutions, and then take to the board and then recommend to the board for the board to make decisions. Because remember, the committees are not autonomous from the board. The board still has to approve on anything that the committees has decided on. Yes, in your MOI, you could state otherwise, but it's prudent to have a system where the entire board makes the final decision. So here are a couple of committees that you will be required to sit in, and I advise you to sit in a committee where your skill set is suited to you. I do know that there come times when we want to experiment in other types of committees. In a small business, probably possible, because there might not be so much technicalities and work around it. But the bigger organizations, you really want to focus on your skill set. So here's just a rough, list of some of the committees: the EXCO, which we already know of, risk audit, health and safety, social ethics, remuneration, etc. You will be required to sit in a committee, serve in that committee, and you can sit on 2 committees, 3 committees, obviously, again, based on time. So that's why I said time is very important. If you're sitting on 3 boards, for example, and in each of those boards, you're sitting on 2 committees, essentially that's 6 committees you have. Now that's 6 committee meetings for every quarter that you have to attend, plus the board meeting. Quite a lot. And then the MOI, very important, is the document that really governs and dictates what each organization can do, right? So the Companies Act does allow organizations to create their own memorandum of incorporation, a personalized one that is specific to the way they want the organization to be run. But again, it must be within the rules and laws of the Companies Act, or it must not contravene the Companies Act. So you're allowed to change the rules of the MOI. You're allowed to put certain items that you feel should be within the organization. For an example, you might say in your MOI that the founder has an extra vote, or the founder has a veto vote if there is ever anything that organization or the board has decided that he or she doesn't like. So the MOI becomes a very important document that really speaks to how an organization is governed. And I will not stress this enough. When you go sit on a board, make sure you ask for the MOI, you read it, understand it, so that you're happy with the rules that have been created. Because once you sign on to be a board member, you're bound to those rules. So MOI, based on the Companies Act, the definition of it, means the document as amended from time to time that sets out the rights, duties, and responsibilities of shareholders, directors, and others within and in relation to a company and other matters as contemplated in section 15. I have 2 more slides, then I'm going to open up for question and discussion. Director liability, something that is there, it is real. Director disqualification, that does happen if ever you're found in a situation where you did not uphold the standards of a director as according to the Companies Act. Director delinquency, something that just happened to Dudumieni, and Trudie is going to take us through that entire judgment. And for us to see what would we have done for us to be declared delinquent, essentially being barred from being a director for the rest of our lives. So there is liability in sitting on boards, but I've always said that any liability that could come upon an individual is really liability that has come out of you doing something that is not within the law, right? If you maintain and keep within the rules that have been set out, and you make the right decisions, not in self-interest, based on honesty and etc., liability won't come towards you. If it does, though, there is directors and officers in liability, indemnity, and insurance. So essentially, these are tools that are afforded to board members to have insurance that can allow them that if they're ever sued by shareholders, there's someone that would pay it off. And then finally, voting plays an important part. I think it's the most important function of a board, the system of voting, because all decisions on a board are made through voting. Voting plays a crucial role in how a company is directed. Significant decisions are decided through a voting system, and not only by shareholders, by boards as well, as a voting system decides on key issues. So voting is very, very important, and every director has a vote. And in any matter that has been put down as a vote by the chairperson, you're allowed to vote in any way that you feel fit. And it is very important that we understand the system, and it's something that we speak of at length in our program. I'll talk about our actual program later on before we close. So any questions, any comments? Let's open it up, see what the audience is saying.
Hi, Munya.
Hi.
Thank you for taking us through that. We do have questions that I have posted in the Q&A session that need to be answered. For starters, the question is, what is the difference between your organization and the Institute of Directors of South Africa? Does a person have to be a member of both organizations, or one or the other?
Okay, so let me start with the latter question. You don't have to be on both. You can be on us or the Institute of Directors, up to you. Differences, we are no affiliation, we are competitors to each other. I guess the difference is our market focus. We focus more on women, we focus more on first-time directors. We don't yet operate as much in the listed market yet, because most of our members are first-time directors, and we're building with them, growing with them. So most of our directors will place them in small businesses, mid-sized businesses, etc. And I think that's really the big difference, as in IOD is really more focused on the JSC market.
Thank you for that.
She also asked, does it matter if you're an entrepreneur or employed? Is there a preferred profile? No, there isn't. Both are extremely attractive in the market. Entrepreneur, corporate, doesn't really matter. Either or. You just, as I said, understand your skill set, be an expert in your skill set, then generally understand how a business functions. Put on top of that your corporate governance understanding. You're ready to go.
Cool. That's the question so far. Ladies that are in the session, keep the questions coming. We will field the questions as we go through the session so that right at the end we are able to answer everybody's questions. So feel free to use the Q&A to ask all your questions, comments, insights. You're probably sitting on a board and you have insights in terms of your experience. Feel free to share that information in the Q&A. Thanks. Over to you, Munya.
Okay, so I still have about 9 minutes before I move on. So I'm going to comment here on Tando. Tando says, you seem to have watered down the importance of board minutes. No, they're very, very important. Just didn't have much time to go over them. But very crucial board minutes. Board minutes become a legal document that will be used in the court of law if ever that need arises. If you Trudie would take us through the Dudumeni judgment, and a lot of what was used there were board minutes, right? Because that's the account of what transpired at the board meeting. So I cannot stress enough the importance of you as a board member to read the minutes when they're sent to you, analyze them, and make sure you are happy with the transcription of what transpired at the meeting. Because remember, minutes are a summarization, right? They're put by the company secretary in bullet points or whatever format they've decided. Your job is to read them. If you're happy with them, and there's no objection, then at the next board meeting, I'm happy, we can sign them off. If you're not happy with that account, say so, because once they're in company records, once they're signed on by the chairperson, it becomes a legal document that can be used against you if that need arises. So, anonymous attendee, I'm a 27-year-old actuary. Is it too soon to be a board member? No, not at all. What I would say to you is you have a lot of you got a lot of time for you to grow your expertise, to learn the craft. So sit on a lot of small business boards, sit on a lot of non-profit organizations, even if you're not getting paid, right? What you're looking for in your earlier years as a board member is to gain that experience. Because once you have experience, I'm telling you, finding a paying board seat, finding paid board seats will be much simpler. Because part of the biggest challenge with getting a first-time board seat is a first-time paying board seat is experience. Where's the experience? Organizations want to employ an individual who's ready to run, right? They've been there, they've done that. So that's why Director Association, we've got a program called Volunteer Director Program, where when you go through our program, our training and everything, at the end of it, we place you on a volunteer seat for the purposes of learning. So at 27, I'd advise you just to sit on as many boards as you can for the next 3, 4, 5 years, NPOs, SMMEs, and then after, when you're 33 or so, you can move on to other boards. Okay, I'm seeing more questions coming in here. Can one company remove a non-exec director on the merits of a wrongdoing they have committed in another company where they also serve as an NED even before they are declared a liquid director? That is rare. That is rare. One should not have anything to do with the other unless there is some sort of business that's some sort of business that they're doing together, or some sort of partnership, joint venture, etc. But outside of that, and just from the purpose, from the viewpoint of we heard that non-executive director did something, therefore we're going to remove them here. I think you'd rather go through first the investigative process, so forth, before you make that decision. In a country where Ocean says, in a country where there's a backlog of inclusivity, why would one person be in more than one board? I don't understand that question. Let me read it again. In a country where there's a backlog of inclusivity, why would one person be in more than one board? Well, look, it does happen. A lot of people sit on multiple boards, a lot of boards. And there are other people that sit, their entire occupation is serving on boards. So they wake up and go to board meetings. That's their occupation. So those individuals can serve and sit on 7, 8 boards. I do know people who do that. So that if they've made it their career to be a professional board member, Jabulila says, who should the company secretary report to? CEO or chairperson? Chairperson 100%. Remember, the company secretary works for the board, not for the company, not for the CEO. So there needs to be that separation of a power, a responsibility, hierarchy, and in many times when a company secretary is reporting to the CEO, there's something wrong with that structure. The company secretary must report to the chairperson because the company secretary works and is employed by the board, not by the company itself. Oh, Sarah saying, actually, remember that question that I asked earlier. I do not think it is unethical to allow board members to do business with the company, especially if it's a private company, not state. However, that process must be transparent, fair, equitable, and must be proven that it will add value both in service and cost to the company. Interesting there from Sarah. Okay, I'm going to read about 4 more questions and then I'll introduce Charmaine to take us in our next segment. Tando says, can an MOI supersede the Companies Act? 100% not, cannot. So remember, there are 2 types of MOIs. I want to focus on that, and I spoke of earlier on. Number 1 is the standard MOI, which every PTY that most of us have registered comes standard, right? So there's the option of having a customized one, but we mostly use or just go for the standard one. So that definitely doesn't go against the Companies Act because it's them that created it. And then there's the customized one, which you can create. That one, you must make sure that the rules you create do not go against the Companies Act. Otherwise, those rules are null and void. And those rules you create cannot go against any law of the country. So the Companies Act actually says you can amend your MOI, but make sure it doesn't go against the Companies Act itself and any law of the country. So that's why in most cases, you bring in, legal people that really have a good understanding of the Companies Act to help you in that. Sipokazi says, do I need to be director member of a board in order to be a member of Directors Association? I have aspirations of being a board member. However, I do not have access to the post available. Please advise. No, you don't have to be a board member before you are a member of Directors Association. It's actually the other way around. You be a member of Directors Association, and then we assist you in your journey to being a board member through training and other programs, which, as I said, I will cover our program that we have that is currently running, and the partnership we created with Bwasa that gives some fantastic discounts, which I think all of us should join. They can really help us to grow our direct. Gobisa says, apologies, I missed the introduction about the role of Directors Associations. Can I get clarity on that? Thanks. The role of Directors Association, well, look, simple. We are a member-driven organization. Our objective is to equip, train, place our members on different boards, create a platform for them to network with other board members, education, corporate governance, to stay abreast of corporate governance. Corporate governance is always evolving. So one of the things that we do for our members is on a yearly basis, twice a year, we give them free corporate governance training, just an upskilling, which is part of their membership fee. So that, you keep abreast of the latest trends in corporate governance. So that's really our role for our members, to ensure such items. Okay. Okay, so Jenny says, and this is the last one that I'm going to move into, Trudie. This is a good initiative. However, I don't necessarily agree with the notion that there are not enough board-ready women. I've seen and come across very qualified women who are not getting recognized for such positions. I've also seen in my position as company secretary a fair share of unqualified men on boards. That is 100%. No, so definitely there are a lot of men that are unqualified on boards. So I think when we say board-ready, we're talking about women that have had experience on boards. So if we were to look at the JSE market, and if we were to place women on JSE boards right now, although there are a lot of extremely competent, qualified in their industries out there, the problem is they don't yet have the board experience because they haven't been given the opportunity to go through the pipeline, starting at SMME or starting in senior management, executive, and going through shadowing other directors that are currently there. Those are the type of items we're talking about. And that's what we're trying to address and change, so that there's a big pipeline of women that have got board experience, not just saying I am a lawyer and I'm a very qualified lawyer. You want to say I'm a qualified lawyer who's got board experience, who can also sit on a listed board. All right, so it's 5 o'clock now, right on time. I'm going to introduce Charmaine, who's going to come in and... Charmaine, are you there? Your audio is off, Charmaine.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. There we go.
Thank you.
So this is Charmaine Soobramoney. She is a colleague of ours. She is an advisor to Directors Association. She's been with us for a good 2-3 years now. Been very instrumental and helpful in where we are now. So we appreciate her efforts and what she's done for us. So she's got a lot of experience on the board. She's one of those ladies that I don't know how she does everything she does. So she does so many things, like 100 million things she does. So many boards, her business, etc. So she's just going to talk us through, creating your director brand and other items around being a board member, especially from a female perspective. So Charmaine, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you actually hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I always start by including everybody because diversity is critical for our country. So I'm going to say good afternoon, Dumalang, Sabona, Assalamu alaikum, Boker Tov, Honant, and Namaste. My goal today is to just share some insights on what I believe is required in order for us to build our brand. And I'm not going to be chatting about director brand per se, but just brand in general. Because in order for being able to be effective in anything that you actually do, you need to be clear on who you are and how best you take the position at that board seat when it does become available. So before I delve into personal branding per se, it is actually important for us to acknowledge a few things. As women, we are marginalized across the globe in many spheres of our lives, right? And there are enough stats and research papers that talk about the plight of women. So I'm not going to even delve into that. But what was important that Mandisa said, that so many years later, there's only 20% of representation on the JSE listed boards. The saga around unequal pay continues. The reality is, many of us, women, are victims and survivors of gender-based violence. And we're also victims and survivors of sexual harassment in this corporate space. So all of these things actually impact our confidence, our ability to sit at the table and know when it is appropriate to speak or not. So I'm going to utilize all of that because we are women. It is Women's Month. The change is pretty slow, but it's actually happening. Okay, so the point I want to really bring home is the fact that we need to acknowledge that although the journey started on the 9th of August 1956, the change has been very slow. Okay, so what is it that we're all going to be doing to make that change happen more radically and more quickly? As a change activist, I often take the platform to plant the seed because we all need to do our bit to drive change that's meaningful. And trust me, I'm going to go to your brand, but please let me give you a minute to just think about it. So what are you going to do to ensure that we as women get the respect and the equality, not that we deserve, that we actually have a right to, because we do have the ability to drive meaningful change, drive strategy, and actually grow ourselves, our businesses, our community, the country, and the flipping world, because there's too few women even leading as presidents. So I can assure you that the Directors Association is committed to getting women at the seat. And it is for that reason that Munya Duvera, the chairperson that just chatted, has actually lobbied for government to take this so seriously that there's a paper there, 40% of female representation within a certain period of time. The reality is, do we have enough women to fill those seats? And I've just heard somebody that serves as a company secretary indicated that she's witnessed that there is women. It's just that they are not being exposed to the levels that they need to be. And that's what the Directors Association needs to do. But what also became apparent in one of the questions that was actually asked is to why is there so many people sitting on so many boards? And Munya, I think a lesson for us is to be able to, when revising the submission, to drive limitation of the number of seats. So each capable, confident, competent person actually has an opportunity to sit at that boardroom table. So it's not being just represented by women that either connected with government or are acquired enough wealth to be able to influence certain outcomes. Because the names on JSD listed boards are generally the women that we all know of. Munya, am I taking questions in between or whilst I'm done?
When you're done.
Okay. The fact is, unless compliance is forced upon us, legislation is not going to change and compliance is going to be minimal, right? That's a fact. I can assure you that the change with regard to the legislation will come, and it's not going to take 30 years. As far as I'm concerned, and as far as Munya is concerned, we will drive this within the next 5 years. So last year, July, we got the confirmation, and Munya, we have 4 more years to make that happen, right? So what does it actually mean to be board ready or to be equipped to serve as a director? Munya has already taken you to the fact that you need to be knowledgeable. You need to understand what's required from a legislative point of view. He does enough training from a Directors Association's point of view. There's enough literature. And I also believe that you need to be hungry for knowledge and you need to make yourself a daily student where you actually learn, where you're on top of things, not necessarily about directorship, but in all aspects of your life. Because when you're knowledgeable and fully rounded, you are able to have conversations more competently and confidently, right? So that's one aspect. Technical knowledge, understanding what the expectations are, and drive that narrative. So that's what you need to do. The second angle is being able to, or the second aspect is being able to utilize that knowledge and apply it effectively in situations that may arise, whether it is in the boardroom or just with employees and things, or people that you're having conversations with. By doing simple acts of that nature, you build your ability to speak confidently, ask questions of curiosity, and just grow your know-how. So having technical knowledge and being able to apply it in every aspect of your life. So that's largely your start to your brand building. Factors, you cannot build your brand overnight. So putting on nice clothes, beautiful makeup, being articulate, what else? Requires, that's one aspect of it, but there's more to it, right? You just need to be committed to building your personal brand. You need to take action and you need to reflect on it on a regular basis. So you're probably going to ask me the question, so how do I actually do that? You have to be self-aware and you actually have to be self-confident. So how do you build your self-confidence? Like, so what do you actually do? I'll give you an examples of what I actually do, right? And I seek technical knowledge, and every day I set aside 30 minutes just to be aware and understand what's actually happening. I do not consume the news because I find it negative and it just brings my energy level down. So that's what I do. So it's all about choices. What I find is, as women, on a daily basis, we take on different roles. We either mothers, we wives, we girlfriends, we executives, we sisters. And often we get a little bit confused as to who we really are because we're giving up so much of ourselves. We don't even know who we are to be able to understand what is it that we bring to the table and how best we drive it. So what I've done in my early stages of my life, and I'm going to say early stages of my life because according to Munya's definition, 35 to 45 is young. I can tell you, I'm disappointed, Munya, because I don't qualify as young anymore. So in my early stages of my life, I used to journal. What I used to journal is, on my day, What is it that made me happy? What is it that made me sad? What is it that I enjoyed of today? And what energizes me? And on points of reflection, you'd be able to establish what makes you tick and what you need to drive when building your brand. I hope that makes sense. It's a pity that I can't see everybody. I hope that makes sense to you. But if it doesn't, write down your questions and you can actually ask me more clarification questions as we move on, right? So the things you should not do in a boardroom, which I actually notice having sat on a number of boards, it's like I often notice when women walk into a boardroom, they either take a seat where they're invisible, even if it's a workshop or whatever. And if they're sitting at the table and men walk in, they will wake up to give them the seat. Listen to me, sisters. You have a right to be there and you have the right to sit at the table, not behind the table. And you know, I must say, Sheryl Sandberg so nicely put it. And if you guys have not read the book, Lean In, I suggest that you do. And I'm actually going to read that quote that she actually said. In time, there will be no female leaders. There will just be leaders. I hope that I'm alive to actually see that being an absolute reality. You know, so what I'm wanting to share with the ladies, you're not there in the boardroom to unwrap the sandwiches. You're not there to give your seat away. You're there because you matter and you have a lot to give. So in addition to self-confidence and establishing your self-awareness, I'm going to briefly go into 6 other factors that helps build a unique and engaging brand, right? The 6 factors, in addition to self-confidence and self-awareness, have focus. And what do I actually mean by having focus? You need to carve your niche for yourself because you are unique and you're a brand. You need to be memorable. There's too much noise out there. There's too many people just wanting to do things because they believe that's what's expected of them. No, there's nothing expected of you. If you're self-aware, self-confident, know exactly what you want to bring to the table and what narrative you want to drive, it becomes clearer, but that takes work. So my plea to you is start working on that. And once you're aware, you'll carve your niche for yourself and you will make sure that you're not diluted into things. You stand out. Be clear on what sets you apart and drive that agenda daily. So brand building requires action, knowing who you are and driving that agenda daily. And that's how you build your messaging as to who you are and what is it that you have to offer. Munya made references to the different committees, right? So you have, assuming that your goal is that you want to sit on the social and ethics committee. So when you're building your brand, all your messages and actions need to be aligned with that intent. The alignment is an extension of how you choose to live your life daily. So everything you do needs to be ethical. You need to actually understand the different legislation, start reading up on it. I hope that makes sense to all of you. I often hear people, like a couple people have indicated when I actually chat with them, oh, I'm building my director brand, and my director brand is wanting to be a chairman of boards. No, you cannot crawl, you cannot walk before you crawl. Fact. So in order to be able to start building your strong, there's no such thing as director brand. In order, if you're clear on who you are, you build your personal brand, and that creates because then you communicate with the world, and then it helps get you the seat at the table. Okay, so you cannot be a chairman if you've not served as a normal director. My first board appointment I had when I was 34, and that was a good couple of years ago. It was a non-paying board appointment. I served on the board of the South African Savings Institute called SASI. Didn't pay me, but what it did do, and it was aligned to the brand or my brand, and my brand is being financially free and being part of the savings environment. So I served on that board to be able to give back, but also gain the experience that I need to be able to utilize brand into serve on other boards. So you need to start somewhere, but don't just choose, don't just be hungry to be on a board and basically choose to sit on any board that is not even ethical. And there you go, tarnishing your reputation. So be intentful, be clear, understand who you are and what is it that you want to drive and how best you drive it. There's no right or wrong answer. You know who you are. You're a unique brand. You know what your strengths are. Understand what your limitations are and work on that. And there's people, if you need more knowledge, there's free websites that you could go to and build that up. If you need technical expertise, Munya and the team are there to actually give you that. So there's enough information to be able to build your knowledge competence and your soft skills. You could reach out. Okay. So we went self-awareness, we went confidence, you need to have focus, you need to be memorable. What else do you need to be? You need to be authentic, you need to be genuine, and you need to be real. When you actually are fake, people could see through that. And that actually also impacts your ability to secure the boards that you will need to. And you know, when you're real and authentic, and when you know what your value is, and that's your extension, it's so easy to live that on a daily basis. It doesn't zap you of any energy. It actually energizes you. So just remember that. And often, especially when we're young, and I mean, I've been down that route as women, we feel we have to fit a certain box. We feel we have to look a certain way. We feel like we can't talk or be ourselves. Learn to find your voices. And if you're battling to find your voice, battling to find your confidence, reach out, because we need to be able to support more of us, because only with all of us being confident, we can drive the agendas to the extent we need to. Otherwise, 30 years later, into the future, we'll still be sitting here and having the same conversation. And I pray the conversation that we have then is going to be very different to the conversations that we're having now. Okay. The other thing is, let's be consistent. You have to demonstrate consistency, and I cannot express this more than I'm currently doing. You need to be consistent across your communication, what you say, what you write, what you put into Facebook, what you put onto LinkedIn, what you put onto your Instagram. So you can't say, oh, I'm this, I'm like, I'm very intelligent, I'm da-da-da-da-da, and then somewhere else you use foul language and you expose another side to you. That inconsistency, you expose yourself. It's not like the old days where there was no social media, and what you say you are and what you really are, it's very few people get to find out. The world has changed. We need to move, and being real and authentic and consistent are the keys to your success. Don't underestimate the power of that, okay? And you know, what I'm going to say next is be ready to fail. And it is such an important thing to take to heart, because most of us choose not to act or choose not to take the step or give opportunities away because we're afraid. We're actually so afraid to fail. But you know what? It is through your failures that you have the biggest growth. And I personally am testament to that. So the point I want to raise and emphasize, that don't be afraid of what if. I mean, you're doing yourself a disservice, okay? You are I often, and I kind of get a little bit emotional when I even make this point, because so many people have gone through lives, and I'm chatting to people daily where they tell me I wish I did it. I'm 70 years old now, I'm 60 years old, I've missed out on so much. And if only the audience could hear those conversations, it will fire you up to be able to do the things that your heart wants you to do or you wish to do, and not worry about failure, because failure is going to come to all of us. It's how we choose to handle it. Okay. So yeah, so please just do what you need to do to be able to drive your agenda and drive the agenda of people that are unable to do so. And that also gives you a lot of gratification. And right now we could have we need all your voices to drive the equality agenda for women and get more women at those boardroom seats, because you have work to do. Those of you who are not able to, or have not got the technique or the skills to be able to serve on boards, get it, drive it, get the knowledge. Those of you who are, show up, put your hands up, demonstrate to the world that you're available to do that, and start branding yourself and start getting those messages out there on the different platforms. You know, the reality is, often I find us women is that we're so fixated on what other people say about us. It's bad, and we allow all the things that happen around us to define how we feel. And we utilize that energy into worrying about what other people think and not moving our success. So we dilute the energy. So the point I'm making is, as women, we have a lot in our control. So if serving on boards is what drives your passion, and you want to do, because as Munya pointed out, if you're on a board, you are able to effect changes far quicker than when you're not on the board. And later on, I'll share an example of 2 of the things that I was able to drive because of the way I was positioned myself, if I may say. Okay. Often, and what I also find, when women are in a room, and I'm not saying all women, but generally, they fail to bring the voices in the room or on platforms because they're afraid to say the wrong thing, or, you know, or they have these limiting beliefs in their head. And trust me, as soon as you decide that this is who you are, this is what you want to achieve, and this is how you want to drive the agenda, and you practice that on a daily basis, the ability to voice an opinion, the ability to state how you feel will come naturally to you. You do need to be able to build the techniques that's going to give you the confidence to be able to speak up. As a board member, as Munya mentioned, you have to be confident. You have to be able to express an opposing view without fear of who might say what or who may decide to get rid of you, because you're not there to make friends. You're there to look after the interests of the shareholders, the stakeholders, and the communities, because it's not about making profit anymore. It is about driving different agendas and also the social agendas. Like, I have a couple of mantras that I live by on a regular basis, on a daily basis, actually, not regular basis. And one of them is, I never lose. Either I win or I learn. And that's how I frame my failures. Because if I get so caught up in my failures, trust me, I will never move ahead. I'll just be so afraid that it will actually cripple me, and fear cripples. Okay. So I'm just thinking, I went through all of those. What did I miss out? Okay, it's also important for you to be able to push past your comfort zone, because often when we're comfortable and all things seems to be, we're getting the money, we're getting the praises, but you know, as I pointed out, whatever happens around you should not impact you, whether it's good or bad. Because as women, good news, we're all excited. Oh wow, life is all great and bubbly. And when it's not, we go into our negative mode. So get to that state of self-confidence where you have so much control over how you feel, what you do, and the agendas that you actually drive. Okay, the other points in building your brands is also create a positive impact. And what do I actually mean by that? It has been my experience that personal brands that drive positive impact is gaining recognition, traction, and relevance. So when you're building your brand, don't just drive profitability, because that's short term. Brand building is longevity. It's about making you relevant, because you're not only adding value to yourself and the businesses you serve, but you're adding value to society at large. And think about that in your brand building exercises. And you know, as I pointed out, an authentic brand does not change with the job that you're doing. It does not change with the project that you're busy with. Your brand needs to be an extension of everything you choose to do. Because if you, I'm a passive wife at home, and I'm a, I don't know, confident woman in the boardroom, and then I'm a subservient Indian woman when I visit my family. That's flippin' tiring. It's not authentic. It's not real. It's just energy zapping, and you come across as being a fake. Okay, so think about it in your brand building exercise, right? And what's important is that you actually leave a positive impact. Well, that's what I wake up every day. My goal is to just impact one person's life positively on a daily basis. My big goal is to impact 1 million people so they could actually live a fulfilled, happy, enjoyable life. So we all have these goals and that we need to be able to fulfill. Every night I reflect as to whether I actually achieved my agenda or not. And that's what each one of us needs to do in order to make the world better, but make our lives better as well. Because right now we could do with a lot of kindness and courage to drive the agendas we need to. And I'm not even going to go into the situation where we find ourselves as a result of inaction and the poverty and the inequalities and where we've come from. But the reality it is here. And each of us have a role to play in changing the lives and the narrative of our own being, equality, whether it's gender equality or just equality for people at large. But that's something for you to define, carve out, and drive. And you know, it is critical that we spend time, like a lot of time, not a lot, on a daily basis. As women, we're always so busy. And because of the different faces, we kind of get confused as to who we are. Spend half an hour just reflecting on yourself. And in that reflection time, you actually get clarity and you start knowing who you really are, what agendas you want to drive, and you start building a brand that is meaningful to you, but also impactful to the world, right? There is, like, as I pointed out earlier, there's this myth about having different brands. You need to have a director brand. No, you don't need to have a director brand. You need to have a family brand. No, you don't need to have a family brand. It just dilutes who you are. Brand is, have a personal brand. Have a personal brand that is so powerful that it actually speaks across, I don't know, across sectors, across everything. So you don't have to be anything but who you are. And that realness will actually get you jobs. It will get you opportunities. It will make you money. And it will actually, like, you'll be so good at what you do that you'll have the potential to really make meaningful change to other people as well. And that's purposeful and satisfying. Munya said that being a director could be a second source of income. Yes, that's one benefit. The other benefit is to be able, when you're in that position, and if you have the confidence to have the voice to speak out and not just be there to make the numbers, you can actually drive change. And the corporate scandals and things that have actually happened would not happen to the extent that that it has been happening. Because what's often happening is people, the way the board structures are happening, people bring in their friends. And when you bring in your friends, you're less likely to challenge, question, and get into debates. Why? Because you feel, oh, my friend brought me in and therefore I have to be grateful and respectful and not challenge. No, that's not why you're a board member. You're a board member because you have the technical skills, you have the confidence to be able to drive the mandate of that business for the good of the stakeholders. Okay, so that's what your board role is. And that brand building, work on it. Be intentful. Get the help that you need, and do little steps. You can carve out your brand. You need to do the work, because nothing is successful if you don't do work on it. You can go. You could go today. I mean, I personally, and when you could tell you, I've turned out board opportunities that pays relatively well. Why? Probably going to think I'm stupid. No, I'm not stupid. But being a board member is onerous. You need to ask yourself, is it aligned to the value that is it aligned to your brand? If it's not aligned to your brand, why do you want to dilute your brand? Okay, so those are questions you need to ask yourself in the process of your brand building exercise. I'm going to share 2 stories with you, right, through my brand building journey. About 20 years ago, I was employed to head up, I was a senior manager in a legal services division of an insurance company. And at that point, at that time, transformation was new, so they needed some black faces. And guess what? I was the only black faces amongst a sea of white Afrikaner men. So my first management meeting, I get to hear how they need to get more black faces in the boardroom. So I was uncomfortable with the conversation, and I had 2 choices: either to shut up, be happy to actually earn my salary, or challenge this. And what did I do? I challenged it. And then they started speaking Afrikaans. Not very good at Afrikaans because I had an E for Afrikaans. And I had an Indian guy teaching me Afrikaans, so you can understand, right? But the fact of the matter is, they started speaking, and I said, "Oh, that's rude," but yeah, they continued. So that was the start of my early career. Then I kind of didn't keep quiet. I kept challenging, questioning, and you need to. In order for change to happen, you cannot be a passenger. You could understand the consequences, understand what you're in for, and be prepared to go the journey. So a month down the line after I started, they were going to launch a new product. And I knew this product was not in compliance with legislation. So I walk into the boardroom, and now this is with the directors on the board, with a couple of other people. I'm the only black face in the room, and it's about 8 men, and there was another white female. That was it. And then I get told, "You do not come into my boardroom and tell me how I run my business." And I stand up and go, "Well, you're clearly paying me for something, aren't you? And you're paying me for my legal brain, and I'm telling you it's not acceptable." And I flip and get shut down. And my boss was sitting in there. He says nothing. It was the afternoon. Meeting finished, and I said, "Well, we're not doing it." Meeting finished. I go, "Why am I sharing with this? There's relevance to why I'm actually sharing this." So I go home, cried in the car, because how could they treat me this way? I had choices. I had choices as to whether I'm going to allow them to step over me, or I'm going to continue to stand my ground. And what I did, come into the next morning after I cried the whole night, and my husband told me how stupid I am, giving my resignation because nothing's, well, I am going to drive the changes. I go into my manager's, Munya, do I still have time?
Yes, you got, about 15 minutes. And then just remember Q&A so that you can also just...
Okay, cool. Sorry. I get a bit carried away. My apologies. Okay, the point I'm making, I go into my manager's room, office, and he goes, "Oh, you're a real tiger, aren't you?" And I go like, "Really? Tiger? You didn't even have the courage to actually speak up and support me." I go into my office, one of the actuaries, and he's still around, goes, "Do you know who you were speaking to?" I was like, "I know who he is. I know he's a director." "Well, I suggest you go and apologize to him because you wouldn't go anywhere in this business." And I was like, "I'm not apologizing to anybody." So people will expect you to do a whole lot. You don't have to follow what they ask you to do. You need to be confident in what you are there to deliver and serve, and you need to be able to take a stand on what is right for you. So this particular, his soul rest in peace, he had passed on now. Whenever this executive used to see me coming down the passage, he used to go into somebody else's office and avoid me. So one day I was up on the top floor seeing the CEO, and I saw him in his office. I knocked on the door and went in. And I go, "Hello, Mr. I'll tell you his name, he's no longer with them, Mr. Henderson. How are you doing?" And he was like, "Oh," he fumbled, and he was like, and he goes, "No, I'm fine." And I go, "So how's your weekend?" Because it was a Monday morning. And he goes, "Oh, it was fine." And he gave me this whole story about how they went to a game reserve and the giraffe. And ever since, we built a connection. They didn't know me. They just saw me as a black face that they have not had connections with before, coming into their space to tell them how to run their business. So what you need to do as when you read the Lean In, and I've not read the Lean In then because it's recent, I mean, it was Cheryl's book quite later. You lean in. You tell them about yourself. You demonstrate that you're there to actually add value and not just be the numbers. So that's the moral of that particular story. It was like decades ago. People thought I'm going to get fired, okay? And people just told the line. I chose to step aside. And ever since, I've been driving that narrative of change to bring more people of color, to be able to have that impact that we need to. So I'm pleading to you guys out there. We have the ability to change and drive meaningful change, but each of us need to find voices. So I'm going to give you another story. I currently chair the board of Business and Arts South Africa. I've been there for 3 years. I was elected onto the board, and after 1 year of election, I was appointed to be able to chair the board. What did I do? I had the opportunity to change the narrative. Now the board has, out of 12 board members, 7 of them are women. And I insist that most of the suppliers that we engage with should be women. Because if you and I don't change the story or the narrative or don't act, nothing changes. So my point is, equip yourself to be a confident individual that's going to drive meaningful change for yourself, but for the community that we need to help and drive and change, because not everybody has opportunities. So when we get the opportunities, get the knowledge, build your confidence, and do everything in your power to drive change for yourself as well as for people that's going to come after us. So just to be able to kind of wrap up. So what do you need to build your personal brand? Self-confidence and self-awareness, and understand the techniques, right? You need to be focused on what is it that you want to do and drive, whether in your personal life, a board perspective, and drive that narrative. You need to be real and authentic. You need to be consistent in whatever you say. If you say something, follow through. If you do something, question yourself, is it in line with my brand? Is it in line with what I stand for? If it's not, then ask yourself what needs to change. Because you don't actually just build a brand and nothing changes. It does evolve depending on your experience or depending on what you need to do or what you're trying to achieve. So it does evolve. It doesn't have to be stagnant, but know why it's evolving and whether it's driving the agendas that you want to. And I'm going to say it, I told you, don't fear failure, embrace it. The greatest learnings come from embracing your fears and acting. Don't be afraid to act. And just like drive a positive impact, just drive it. Set out to be able to influence the world with good, and good things will actually come to you. Be curious, ask questions, be a constant learner. You don't actually have to go get degrees and additional certificates. Just learn. There are enough websites. And if you need information, reach out and I'll share the websites that I go through regularly. I don't even have to pay a cent for it. Okay? And what I often find though, I mean, boardrooms are one aspect when we're actually having physical meetings, and this has just come to mind. I often find when we're actually having, what do you call this? Online meetings. Women, and I just did this earlier, and that was deliberate, right? We tend to put our cameras off. So if your connectivity is poor, I understand, right? But if your connectivity is not poor, please leave your cameras on, because the fact is only 7% of what you like is verbal, right? 38% of it is largely with your projection and your vocals, and 55% is visual. So brand building is about allowing people to see you and you're allowing them to move and connect with you. And that is critical. You know, my first board appointment, and when I'm going to talk my paying board appointment, I was actually presenting at a conference years ago. And it was one of the panelists that was on the conference with me that called me aside and go, well, I love what you stand for and I love the way you did da-di-da-di-da. Would you be interested on serving on this for? I was like, who are they? What do they do? And how do they impact the world? And it was based on that that I chose to serve on the board. I didn't go, oh, yes, please. Understand, ask questions, get clarity. Because you want to build a consistent brand that's going to consistently give you money, consistently be relevant, and consistently drive agendas that mean something for you. So find your purpose, find your voice, and drive that, right? I'm going to, like, in the chat box, leave a couple of, in the process of knowing yourself. I recently got a woman that to talk at an event to be able to help people, especially where you're going through. And that's, I would love for you to look at that video. And I'll tell you why. It's going to give you some insights about you as an individual and how you support people right now through the hardship that they're actually going through. So please do me a favor and just look at it, because sometimes we are so caught up in the losses that we currently feel, and it's not just the loss of life, but just loss of a lot, job and freedom and ability to loss of movement. That is also impacting and confusing us. So she gives a little bit more clarity as well as techniques on how to move out of that. And I think I just took the opportunity to share with you because it will just create an awareness and also make you more impactful with people around you. I did make this point, but I'm going to make it again, right? I often find people emulating others or wanting to fit into a box that society thinks we need to fit in. Trust me. You have a unique offering, build on that. You don't have to be anybody else. But in order to have that boardroom seat and be effective and competent, that people respect you, you need to have the knowledge, you need to have the skills to be able to articulate, and you need to be able to challenge. So if you can build all of that and demonstrate that you have the right there, because trust me, I've been in boardrooms, and somebody already made it in the questioning, where some of the men don't deserve to be there, but they think they have a right to tell us that we don't deserve to be there, or shut us down when we try and explain. I often find, like, when women are explaining, so therefore it's important that you build your vocals and and be assertive and confident. So even when they do try and shut us down, we step up and go, excuse me, I am here and have something to say. So with knowledge and confidence and soft skills and practicing, you'd be able to build that skill to go, don't mess with me. I have a lot to offer, and you are going to listen to what I have to say. I'm actually going to just read an extract of a poem before I close off, because I think women are just phenomenal. And yeah, if you just be with me. It's the fire in my eyes and the flash of my teeth, the swing in my waist and the joy in my feet. I'm a woman, phenomenally. That's from Maya Angelou. So women, you are phenomenal. Know your power, know your space, and take control. From a board perspective, you don't need any other brand. You need to gain the knowledge, you need to gain the confidence, and you have to have the confidence to be able to challenge and know your place. Because often, and I'm going to say it, we doubt ourselves because of the experiences we come from. We doubt ourselves because we don't love ourselves enough. And many people plant doubt in our minds. On that note, I'm going to sign off with love and light, because that's what I usually do. I'm sending you all love and light. And I want to say thank you so much for listening to me. I will put some stuff on the chat box in a few minutes, as I'm old and it will take me a little longer. So anybody wants to ask me some questions, I'm happy to address it.
Okay, I think There's some Q&As here, but they look like comments rather than questions.
Would you mind reading it, please, Munya? Because you know, technology and me are not very good friends.
Okay, so there's thank you, Charmaine. The points you raise are so important for personal development, not just brand building. Sarah says, Charmaine, your story reminds me of the saying, be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. Ocean, okay, she's raising an earlier question, which was about inclusivity, which I answered earlier. Maybe I'll touch that on a bit later on. Masitedi says, thank you for the presentation and the words of encouragement. Yeah, about it.
Thank you.
Charmaine, thank you so much for that. Really, really enjoyed that. Exciting. I think what I got from there was the authenticity part. Be authentic, be yourself. There is no director brand, there's just your brand, right? So focus on your brand, create your personal brand, which will literally cover all sectors, all areas, business, personal, corporate, etc., etc. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our next guest speaker, our other colleague, who is a board member of Directors Association, Trudie Nichols. Hi, Trudie. You well?
Hi, Munya. I'm good.
Fantastic. So Trudie's going to take us through some technical board stuff, right? Some Companies Act, some delinquency stuff, some Dudumeni stuff. Those of us who've been following the news around Dudumeni and her verdict. So she's going to take us through what happened, that judgment, what it meant, what it means for directors, and how it can affect you as a director. And if you have any questions, please just put them out in the chat, and we'll go through them later on during the presentation. Trudie?
Thanks, Munya. Good evening, everyone. Just firstly, in solidarity with Charmaine, I think I perhaps should also state that I'm also beyond the age of youth as defined by Munya. So I stand with her on comment. Okay, so I'm going to be unpacking the Myeni judgment as it's become colloquially known, which was delivered in May this year and was a judgment by Judge Tolmay. And the reason why this judgment is interesting is because it addresses quite a number of different aspects of our law, which I'm going to just briefly go through, and then hopefully we can all have a chat about it afterwards. You can put your queries into the Q&A box. So this judgment is in the case by the Organization Undoing Tax Abuse, which is known as OTA, and the South African Airways Pilot Association, SAPA, were the plaintiffs against Ms. Myeni and others, and it's become known colloquially as the Myeni judgment. So this was not the first time that a court has had to consider the case of an individual who's been declared a delinquent. But what is interesting about this matter is that it addressed the convergence of a number of director roles in a company. It clarified each aspect, it restated the law on these various aspects, and then the court went on to make its specific ruling in relation to Ms. Myeni. Now, the roles which the court addressed in this judgment relates to that of a non-executive director. It related to that of a non-executive director who's a chairperson of the board of directors. And it also relates to that of a non-executive chairperson who is the chairperson of the board of directors of a state-owned entity. Very rarely would all of these three converged in the perfect storm of one matter. So the facts briefly in this matter were that OTA and SAPA sought an order to have Ms. Myeni declared a delinquent director. Now, Ms. Myeni was the former non-executive chairperson of SAA, and they sought to have her declared a delinquent director in terms of Section 162, subsection 5 of the Companies Act. It was common cause in the papers that Ms. Myeni had a board in September 2009. She became its acting chairperson in December 2012, was appointed a chairperson in January 2015, and was reappointed as the chairperson in September 2016, where she served until 2017. She was also a member of the Accounting Authority of SAA, as contemplated by the Public Finance Management Act, because SAA is listed as a major public entity in terms of Schedule 2 of the PFMA, and its board is the designated accounting authority in terms of Section 49(2)(a) of the PFMA. Now, Section 162 of the Companies Act provides that a company, a shareholder, a director, company secretary or prescribed officer of the company, a registered trade union that represents employees of the company, or any other representative of the employees of the company may apply to court for an order to declare a director delinquent on these following terms, amongst others. Basically, where a director has grossly abused the position of a director, intentionally or by gross negligence inflicted harm upon the company or a subsidiary of the company, contrary to the provisions of the Act, has acted in a manner that amounts to gross negligence, willful misconduct, or breach of trust in relation to the performance of that director's duties. The declaration of delinquency in terms of the Act has the effect that the person may not serve as a director of a company for a minimum of 7 years or any extended period as the court decides to order. Now, as I mentioned previously, this is not the first time that a court has made a declaration of delinquency against a director, and the leading case in the SA judgment of Bwasa has specifically stated that Section 162 has a protective purpose, and that's namely to ensure that those who invest in companies, big or small, are protected against directors who engage in serious misconduct. That is conduct that breaches the bond of trust that shareholders have in people that they appoint to the board of directors. So directors who show themselves unworthy of that trust are declared delinquent and are excluded from the office of directors. It's intended to protect those who deal with the companies by ensuring that the management of those companies is in fit hands. It's also required in the public interest, so that those who enjoy the benefit of incorporation, the company, and limited liability should not abuse their possessions. The SCA has also determined that a declaration of delinquency can only be made in cases of serious misconduct, and the 4 grounds specified in Section 162, subsection 5C, all have a common feature that involves serious misconduct on the part of the director. So once these grounds of delinquency have been established, the court is obliged to grant the order. It has no discretion in this regard. The only discretion that a court has relates to the conditions that might be attached to the order and the duration of the declaration of delinquency. Section 162, subsection 10, sets out the various conditions that a court may grant, in addition to the declaration of delinquency. Now, it was argued that Ms. Myene's alleged conduct and failures during her tenure as the director and chairperson of the board of SAA between 2015 and 2017 constituted willful and grossly negligent breaches of her fiduciary duties in terms of Section 76 of the Companies Act, read with Section 162 of the Companies Act, as well as Sections 50, 51, and 55 of the PFMA. And the plaintiff led its evidence in support of these allegations largely around 2 transactions where it alleged that Ms. Myene had breached her fiduciary duties. Those 2 transactions were known as the Emirates deal and the Airbus transaction deal. Now, in the plaintiff's papers, it had initially set out 4 transactions through which it alleged that Ms. Myene's actions demonstrated her delinquency. But due to the lack of time that they had to lead all this evidence, they decided to focus their attention only on these 2 transactions. They alleged that Ms. Myene, through various acts and omissions, frustrated the implementation of or took steps to ensure that the Emirates deal, which had substantial economic benefits for SAA, fell through. And although the Airbus swap transaction was ultimately concluded, the plaintiffs alleged that her conduct leading up to the implementation of that transaction fell short of the conduct which would be expected of not only a director, but the chairperson of the board of SAA. The court ultimately found that the evidence that had been presented clearly indicated Ms. Mnyeni's obstruction and delay of the Airbus swap transaction. As the chairperson of the board, the court found that she did not show any concern for the catastrophic consequences of her actions, not only for SAA, but for the country. It also found that her conduct in blocking the Emirates deal satisfied the multiple grounds of delinquency, which are set out in section 162, subsection 5, in that not only did she deliberately or through gross negligence inflict substantial harm on SAA, but her attempts to justify her conduct show that she acted dishonestly, in bad faith, and not in the best interest of SAA and the country. Now, one of the sub-issues that was addressed was the issue of legal standing, and particularly that of the legal standing or the locus, because it's apparent that OTA does not, that are listed in 1.6, which is not a shareholder, it's not a director, it's not a company secretary or prescribed officer of the company, nor is it a registered trade union. And that this entire issue was the subject of a separate interlocutory application, which was dealt with separately by the court in December 2019, and the court ultimately decided that OTA did have legal standing to bring the application in terms of section 157, subsection 1D of the Companies Act, which allows any person to exercise the remedies set out in the Act when they are acting in the public interest with the leave of the court. In addition, the second plaintiff in the matter, which was SAPA, clearly had a locus standi, so there was no basis for the matter to not proceed on that basis. A second issue which was raised and which was also decided in an interlocutory application, I've been told that my internet connection is unstable, so I hope that I'm not freezing.
You were freezing a bit, huh? You're freezing a bit.
Okay, when I freeze, will you tell me?
Okay.
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 Don't know how you're going to tell me if I'm frozen, but
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
send me a WhatsApp. So the second interlocutory application that was dealt with was the issue of why was the only director that was targeted, why was it only Ms. Mnyeni? And that issue was addressed by dealing with the fact that essentially Section 66 of the Companies Act provides that it's the board which has collective and ultimate responsibility for the functioning and day-to-day management of a company. So the board is accountable for its performance. However, individual directors still owe the company certain obligations and duties in the performance of their functions as executive or non-executive directors. So the collective responsibility of the board imposes individual duties on directors, and directors are still obliged to comply with their fiduciary duties, which have been codified in the Act in terms of Section 76(2) and 3 of the Act, and they may be held jointly and severally liable for any wrongdoing themselves individually. So Ms. Mnyeni brought an application in which she attempted to join the other board members to the case, but her application was dismissed, and the court essentially found that firstly the relief claim didn't impact the other directors, and they didn't have a direct and substantial interest in the matter. And secondly, she found that a director could not avoid individual liability by blaming the so-called collective, being the board. Notably, what hasn't been decided is whether or not the other directors may still be brought to court by other interested parties on the same set of facts. So the NPA may decide to pursue investigations against the other directors, or any other interested party listed in Section 162 may decide to proceed against the other board members who were board members at the time. But based on Ms. Mnyeni's application, the court found that there was no reason for her to not be sued as a single director to face responsibility for her own actions as a director. The other issue that also was addressed in the judgment was the issue relating to executive versus non-executive directors. And this was quickly addressed by just restating a well-known principle of our law, which has been around since 1991, which basically states that being a non-executive director, whether you're independent or not, does not absolve a person of any legal responsibility. The legal duties of all directors are the same, which are namely the duties of care, skill, and diligence. Compliance with these duties requires an assessment of the role actually played by the director, the information that was available to her, and the information that could have been available. So when considering the powers executed by the non-executive director, it's clearly appropriate that there must be no distinction that is drawn between the two groups, be it executive and non-executive directors. So the fiduciary duties that are owed by a director to a company have now been codified and set out in the Act, and are set out in section 76(2) and 3 of the Act. And they basically state that a director cannot use her possession or any information obtained while acting in the capacity of a director to gain an advantage for herself or for any person other than the company, or to knowingly cause harm to the company. Furthermore, section 76(3) states that a director, when acting in that capacity, must exercise her powers and perform her functions in good faith and for a proper purpose and in the best interest of the company. When a director breaches their fiduciary duties, or there is serious misconduct by the director, then an interested party may apply to court for an order declaring that director to be a delinquent director in terms of section 162(5). The other point that was raised was the issue of the application of the King Code. And this was addressed by way of expert evidence, which was led by an attorney who's written books on corporate governance and who's an expert on the King Code. And essentially what the court ruled here, or found here, was that in terms of King 3, the primary role of a chairperson of a board is to provide leadership to the board, set the ethical tone for its performance, and undertake the management thereof. The chairperson ensures that focus is maintained by the board on what is best for the organization, and the board conducts itself in a way that cultivates and exhibits the characteristics of integrity, competence, responsibility, accountability, fairness, and transparency. Now, we all know that we are now dealing with King 4 and not King 3, but the reason why the court had reason to make reference to King 3 was because that was the King Code that was applicable during the period of Ms. Mnyeni's tenure as chairperson of the board. The other reason why the King Code was relevant was because SAA had undertaken, in terms of its shareholder compact, to comply with the corporate governance principles set out in the King Code. So it's also important to note that when you're dealing with a state-owned entity, the fiduciary duties entrenched in the Companies Act overlap with those contained in the PFMA with regard to major public entities. SA is listed as a major public entity in terms of Schedule 2 to the PFMA, and its board is designated the accounting authority in terms of Section 49, subsection 2A. So all the members of an accounting authority are subject to heightened fiduciary duties when compared to those entrenched in the Companies Act. Section 50 of the PFMA specifically states that directors must, amongst other things, act with fidelity, honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of the public entity, disclose to the Minister of Finance all material facts, including those reasonably discoverable, which in any way may influence the decisions or actions of the Minister, and prevent any prejudice to the financial interest of the state. Section 51 and 55 of the PFMA also set out further responsibilities of the accounting authority. Now, during the Airbus swap transaction, and notwithstanding the fact that the Minister of Finance had directed the board to conclude this transaction by the 21st of December 2015, the court found that Ms. Mnyeni had made no attempt to convene a board meeting for this purpose in order to ratify the signatories, and that the only reason why this had been done was because National Treasury itself had managed to secure the necessary ratifications by the 22nd of December. The court found that she was not only untruthful, but her actions failed to disclose material facts which were directly relevant to the minister's decisions, this being in direct breach of her fiduciary duties in terms of the PFMA. And in delaying the conclusion of the swap transaction, the court found that she had willfully and recklessly contributed to SAA breaching its financial reporting obligations set out in section 51 and 55 of the PFMA. By her attempting to renegotiate that existing transaction, her renegotiation attempts were an indication of an intentional or grossly negligent breach of her fiduciary duties. So section 86(2) of the PFMA also states that a board or a director is guilty of an offence and liable on conviction to a fine or imprisonment of up to 5 years if that board or director willfully or in a grossly negligent way fails to comply with a provision of section 50, 51, or 55 of the PFMA. So the court's finding ultimately, after assessing all the evidence that had been led, was that Ms. Mnyeni did not exercise the ethical and effective leadership required by the Companies Act, King 3, or the PFMA. Not only was she found to have deliberately or through gross negligence have inflicted substantial harm on SAA, but her attempts to justify her conduct show that she acted dishonestly, in bad faith, and not in the best interest of SAA. This led the court to the inevitable conclusion that she had breached her fiduciary duty to act in good faith and for a proper purpose and in the best interest of SAA in terms of section 76(3) of the Companies Act. The court found that her actions and failures showed that she had acted dishonestly, in bad faith, and she deliberately or through gross negligence inflicted substantial harm on SAA. She was not found to have acted as a reasonable director would. The court described her as a director gone rogue who did not have the slightest consideration for her fiduciary duty to SAA. Ultimately, the court declared Ms. Mnyeni to be a delinquent director in terms of section 162(5) of the Act for the remainder of her lifetime. In addition, a punitive cost order was made against her, and the judgment and evidence was referred to the National Prosecuting Authority to consider and to determine whether investigation for potential criminal conduct should follow. It is to be noted, however, that notwithstanding this lifelong declaration of delinquency which was imposed, Ms. Mnyeni can still, after 3 years, apply in terms of section 162, subsection 11 or 12, for the order to be suspended, provided she demonstrates that she has sufficiently remedied or rehabilitated her misconduct. Now, before the finding of delinquency was made, the court did take into consideration what is known as the business judgment rule. And this is because since the role of a director, whether executive or non-executive, is a critical one for both the company and the economy to succeed, particularly because running a business involves taking risk for reward. And when making these decisions, directors are required to consider the risk and the reward. The business judgment rule serves as an important defense to directors for liability for actions that they've taken bona fide and in the best interest of the company. The business judgment rule is set out in subsection 76(4), read with subsection 5 of the Companies Act, and that sets out the entire provisions of this rule. In order to avail oneself of the protections afforded by this rule, directors must ensure that they fall within the scope of the rule by essentially being reasonably informed, not having a material personal financial interest in the matters subject to discussion, and by having a rational basis for their decisions. This principle can only protect those who act in good faith and have taken diligent steps to become informed. Willful misconduct, recklessness, and dishonesty are not protected. So essentially, the key takeaways from this judgment, which I must also note is subject to appeal, the key takeaways for directors are the following. The board bears full responsibility for the functioning and management of the company and is ultimately accountable for the performance of the company. Non-executive directors are not absolved from any fiduciary duties in terms of the Companies Act. In terms of the business judgment rule, a director could be protected from an allegation of breach of her duties where that director took reasonably diligent steps to become informed about the matter, had no conflict of interest in relation to the matter, and had a rational basis for believing and did believe that her decision was in the best interest of the company. And directors may be held jointly and severally liable for decisions taken by the collective. With regard to state-owned entities, directors must keep in mind that the duties described in the PFMA do not exclude the provisions of the Companies Act, but should rather be seen as supplementing the overarching provisions of the Companies Act. Also, once a court has found that the grounds for a delinquency order has been established, the court has no discretion in this regard, and it is obliged to declare that director a delinquent. A declaration of delinquency can subsist for a minimum of 7 years and a maximum of a lifetime of the director, subject to the court's powers to relax the order after 3 years. It should also be noticed that in terms of section 162, subsection 10, which deals with the conditions that a court may impose, one of those conditions relates to payment for loss suffered by any individual as a result of the actions of delinquency of that director. So if you've caused loss or harm, you could be ordered to pay that back in addition to the declaration of delinquency against you. So I'm going to stop there and take questions, provided I haven't lost my internet.
Trudie, my question would be, and maybe you did touch on it, but I'd just like a bit more clarity as to why only taken to court for this and not the rest of the board members. Why did OTA only focus on her and not the entire board? And why did the judge not accept her initial defense of, we made these decisions collectively as a board? So why are you picking on me, only the chairperson, when we decided as a board?
Repeat your question. Why did OTA decide to only pursue one?
Yes, and only sue one and not the rest of the board members.
Well, because they weren't obliged to sue all the board members. A plaintiff can choose who it wants to be its defendant. The interesting fact is this matter it's a 2017 matter, so it started in 2017, and it was heard over a period of 5 weeks, and that was 5 weeks just dealing with 2 sets of issues to prove their case against one director, and then the judgment was heard. The judgment was handed down in May. And they had 2 sets of interlocutory applications that were heard in 2019. And that was just in relation to one director. They maintained that they didn't have the funds to pursue more than one director or the other's director, and they were not obliged to. So that was their choice. The plaintiff is entitled to choose who it wants to sue. It's entitled to choose who it wants to be a defendant. A defendant is entitled to join other wrongdoers if it feels that there are other joint wrongdoers. And this Ms. Myeni attempted to do, but unsuccessfully so. And the court found that there was nothing wrong with OTA choosing only one director and choosing that director to be her and focusing its attention on what her actions were and what her negligence were. And the finding and the evidence all related to her specific conduct or misconduct. It didn't relate to what anyone else did. And the act is very clear. Even though the board is collectively responsible, it doesn't absolve the individual from the individual fiduciary obligations and responsibility to the company. You are still individually jointly and severally liable to the company, and you still have a fiduciary obligation to the company. So there was no reason for them not to, and there was no obligation on them to cite and sue the entire board. As I said also, there's nothing stopping anybody else at this stage from pursuing the rest of the board members, provided on the same evidence or on additional evidence that is directed at those individuals. So when deciding whether or not the test for delinquency has been met, it's objective and it's subjective. So objective meaning, has the standard of a reasonable director, has the director in question complied with what a reasonable director would have done in those circumstances, and subjective, taken into account that person's experience and the knowledge that they had at the time. So in relation to Ms. Mnyeni, subjectively, what was taken into account, the fact was that she had been on this particular board for over 9 years, and that she had put herself forward in the evidence as being a corporate governance expert. So that was the subjective issues against her. And objectively, what would a reasonable director have done in the circumstances of the facts of these two issues? And it was found that what she did was grossly negligent and, in fact, reckless. Why was the shareholder not held accountable? The chair board decisions were known, supporting ongoing, seems the chair became the forewoman. Like I said, this director was targeted for her individual actions. So if you read the judgment is 114 pages long. Most of the judgment centers around the evidence which was led over a period of 5 weeks. That evidence related to her individual actions, what she did or did not do, and how her actions breached the MOI, the Stakeholder Pact, the Companies Act, the Common Law, the PFMA, the King Code. Her actions directly. And that's what it was based on. She was not treated as being the foreperson for the actions of other people. She was assessed based on her own actions and her own response to that actions. So this was an action. And when I say action in the context of action versus application, meaning in an action, the witnesses need to go into a stand and give evidence. In an application, everything is done on affidavit. So there's no opportunity for cross-examination. This was an action where the plaintiff led the evidence of 6 witnesses who all stood up, gave the evidence, and were all subject to cross-examination. And Ms. Mnyeni only led her own evidence, and she was subject to cross-examination. So in assessing the evidence was that which was given and subject to cross-examination by all these witnesses. 6 witnesses for the plaintiff, Ms. Mnyeni on her own, with no corroborating evidence to support anything that she said, and a tower of evidence in support of what the plaintiff said were her individual actions in support of the claim against an application for delinquency against her individually. So that is why it was against her personally and not the shareholders. The shareholders, the state, by the way.
What do you think are the chances of her appeal succeeding?
It can only, if it succeeds, it'll be succeeding on a point of law. It's unlikely that it will succeed on the evidence itself, because of the fact that, as I said, this is an action, and one of the issues in relation to action is that the court is the one who gets to assess the witnesses and their credibility in the box and the manner in which they've given evidence, etc. And that's also very key in the way in which a court comes to its decision. So what generally happens is that the evidence is given, and the evidence is essentially the facts, and then the argument is made to say, well, these are the facts, and this is the law, and this is how the facts tie in with the law, therefore that is why you must make this finding. So the facts that are given in evidence in support of the law is quite key, and the credibility findings made by the court who hears the evidence is also quite key. So what has come out is that the appeal courts, which hear appeals, are very reluctant to overturn credibility findings that are made by the courts which actually hear the evidence. They have no issues with overturning findings based on the application of the law to the facts or an inaccurate application of the law at all. But they very, very reluctantly overturn any credibility findings based on the court's assessment of the witnesses and the manner in which they gave the evidence, especially when there's an adverse finding against one set of witnesses versus the other. In this case, the court gave very, very adverse findings, credibility findings against Ms. Myeni, and it gave glowing credibility findings of the 6 plaintiffs' witnesses. So, and it substantiated those findings, those credibility findings, by stating that repeatedly, when the plaintiffs' witnesses were giving evidence, that Ms. Myeni's counsel was reminded to cross-examine them on this point and to make sure her version was put forward. And then it pointed out in the judgment all the inconsistencies and contradictions between her version on the pleadings and the version that she gave in evidence and the version that was put to the plaintiff's witnesses. So unlikely that if there's going to be an overturning of those factual findings, and if she is successful, it can only be on the application of the law to that. And the judgment is replete with references to SCA judgments that are cases on point. So that's also difficult to imagine, but who knows? Anything else?
I don't see any other questions on the board, on the chat box, yeah?
That mean, hold on.
So is there anyone else with any question? They want to pop into the chat box there, or are we good and happy for now? Oh, there's one from Ocean. You can read that, Trudie.
I'll read it out. Maybe women are not afraid to lead or sit on boards, but following the Myeni and Pierre findings, this country is not ready to emancipate women. I don't know if I agree, to be perfectly honest. I think you have to read the judgment. I think that, as I said, it's 114 pages, but most of it deals with her actions in the context of the 2 transactions, the Emirates deal and the Airsoft transactions, and it ties those actions into how they were a breach of the actual SAA underlying documentation. So the long-term strategic plan, the MLI, the board resolutions, the stakeholder compact, the Companies Act, the King Code, the PFMA. Take Ms. Myeni out of it and put in one of the other male directors who perhaps might have been the chairperson. Put a man in her position who had done everything that she did and the evidence was, and the finding would have been exactly the same. This is not about a woman. This is about a director who was a bad director. I mean, the judgment calls her a director gone rogue. So let's take her out of it and let's call it a director. In fact, that point was actually made by her. So in her evidence, she said that she feels as if she's been targeted because she's a black woman. And the court said, made short shrift of that argument and said, actually, no, that's not the case, because one of the acting CEOs, and there were 3 during the course of the evidence that was led, that were referenced. The second acting CEO was also a black woman. And the court said that, you know, if that's the case, then she should have also have suffered the same prejudice that it's alleged that Ms. Myeni suffered, but that was not the case. In fact, all the witnesses who gave evidence and was acting CEOs, CFOs, human rights, general managers, sorry, not human rights, human resources, the general manager, they all bent over backwards to accommodate her because she was the chairperson in circumstances where the board minutes and requirements did not require them to do that, but they did out of respect for her. She did not afford them the same respect. So the judgment makes mention of the fact that in September 2015, there were in fact 5 board members who should have been sitting on the board, but it should have actually been 6 because the acting CEO at that time was Ms. Mshe, who's now also a Black female. And as the acting CEO, she should have also, in terms of the company's MOI, SAA's MOI, she should have also been sitting on the board and been part of decisions. However, Ms. Mnyeni took the view that she should not be on the board and be part of any decisions, and she excluded her from any decision-making process. So this is not about a woman thing, and it's not about a race thing. This is about you are a director and you're required to comply with your fiduciary obligations as they are set out in the MOI governing the company on whose board you sit on, the Companies Act, the common law, if it's a state-owned entity, the PFMA, the King Code for now, and you must do so with properly. If you don't, these are the consequences. If you do it properly and you feel that you've been targeted unfairly, you have the business judgment rule to protect you. If you can show that all the decisions you took it after being informed as to what the decision was going to be about, applying your mind to the issues and making what you deem to be the correct decision at that point in time, which was in the best interest of the company, then there's absolutely no reason why the business judgment rule won't come to your aid. Because the act is quite clear, it must be gross negligence. It says gross negligence, gross misconduct, not trifling sort of misconduct or inattention to detail. So I don't agree with that comment, I'm afraid. We can't ignore the gendered and patriarchal view in the justice system. So my question, she doesn't have to answer, just wondered if the judgment would have been the same for a man. The judge was a female, by the way. So I think the judgment would have been the same for a man for the reasons that I've just given now. Because I think the judgment is quite objective. It sets out that these requirements, when applied, when you're applying the facts to the law, you're applying it objectively, which is what would a reasonable director have done in the circumstances, and then you apply it subjectively. Subjectively meaning you look at the director in question. So I'm not saying he or she, look at the director in question. What was their experience? What did they do? Did what they do amount to negligence in the circumstance? Do you think, Trudie, do you think the same vigor will be applied in pursuant of justice in the Steinhoff matter by Otis since pension funds? Yes, I think Otis is doing a great job. Otis is one of the NGOs that pursues these public interest litigation for the public good. And I do think they'll pursue it with the same vigor that they've pursued everything else. There's no reason for them not to. I mean, they have limited funds, and I think that's why they're selective with what they do. But when they do pursue it, they pursue it to the nth degree. And as you can see from this matter alone, I mean, the litigation was extensive and costly. So it started in 2017. It was only finalized, the trial, in May 2020. That's 3 years. There was like interlocutory applications in between. There was 5 weeks of trial. And there was adjournments in between, and the matter's still on appeal. That all costs money, which as, you know, non sort of private entity, where do you get this money from? So they are doing great things, and I think they have to be selective about what they go after and how they go after that. So you can't blame them for not pursuing every single delinquent that they see out there. Perhaps other companies should form NPCs and pursue the other delinquents if they feel so strongly about it. seen any other questions.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else in the chat box there. Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Trudie.
Pleasure.
Very insightful, very competent, exact, and you really just broke it down for us. Yeah, so thank you so much for that.
I hope so. If I haven't, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, ladies, audience, we got one more session left for this evening, and probably take about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then we shall close. And essentially, I'm just going to go through you the types of boards that we can find out there in the market, and then what you need to do to get a board seat. So I'm going to just share my screen for the last time. Just give me 2 seconds, just bear with me. I hope we have enjoyed the session. Okay, I'm almost there. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm just going to talk very briefly around the types of boards that you can find, not just in South Africa, but across the world. And just focus on the board itself. Then after that, I'll just speak around what you can do to get a board seat. And then finally, the program that we're offering and the partnership that we have with Bwasa currently. So the board. So 2 types of structures that you can find all over the world. In most countries, you can find 2 types of structures. And this being a unitary structure and a 2-tier or dual structure. And essentially, a unitary structure is where the entire board or all board members all sit on one board, being the chairperson, the exec team, the independent directors, and non-exec directors, all are sitting on one board. And this is a structure that you find in South Africa. Listed boards all have a unitary structure, SOEs, etc. And that's a structure in the system we use in South Africa. A 2-tier structure, though, or dual system, is where you got 2 boards, essentially. You've got an advisory board, which looks after or with interest with the shareholders. And then you've got your more of executive type board structure. So this is something that was used by Steinhoff, which had a dual listing in South Africa and in Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken. And in that country, they required companies to have 2 board structures. So essentially, you've got your board of advisors, right? You've got those individuals that are looking out for the interests of shareholders. And then you've got, secondly, the board with board members that are sitting on an executive type board structure. So those 2 structures you find in South Africa, as I've said, you find mostly the unitary structure. Which one works best is out for debate, right? A lot of people are more for the unitary structure, some are for the dual structure, because the dual structure does provide that oversight. And there's a structure that you find mostly if you're looking at small businesses and NPOs, which will provide an oversight, a group of experts who are giving oversight to the organization. And then you've got the executive team being the entrepreneur and the founders who are carrying out the day-to-day of the organization. So when you go on the board, you're going to find either one. Prevalent is the unitary structure in South Africa. It's good to know and understand that. So what types of boards do we have around the world? So you got your small business boards, you got your listed company boards, you got your non-profit boards, you got your public sector boards, these being your state-owned entities. You got your international boards, especially these are companies that are operating in different countries. Then you got your tertiary or education institutional boards, right? So universities that have a council, etc., which essentially is a board as well. You also have your church boards, which could fall under your non-profit organization. And the interesting fact is all these different types of boards have different approaches, different compliance levels, different structural levels, and that suit the organization and what they are trying to achieve. And what is key is objective. What are the organizations trying to achieve? And this is important because when you sit on a board of a specific entity, of a specific organization, what that organization is trying to achieve is important because it will drive your decision making. It will drive how the board makes decisions, its strategy, etc. So, for example, a non-profit organization, its objective obviously is to cater to the initiative, whatever that initiative might be. And therefore, the decisions that the organization makes are all geared, the board rather, all the decisions the board makes are all geared towards achieving that objective, which is to cater to the initiative. So I would argue then that in a non-profit organization, profit really, or obviously profit is important, but profit really isn't the underlying objective. The underlying objective is to serve that initiative, though you do need to be solvent or you need to be able to carry on and operate the organization. Similar to a public entity, a state-owned entity, a lot of people have raised questions around how government is continuously pumped money into state-owned entities, etc. One would wonder, what is the objective of a state-owned entity? So if you look at SAA, for example, which was just being spoken of now, you could actually look at it and say the benefit that government gets from having a state-owned airline that can fly all over the world, the value of that is more to it than the profitability of South African Airways. So to me, what does that say about a board member when I get onto the board? If profit is always important, but if the objective of the organization is, for an example, in the state-owned entities, is to cater to a specific objective that government has set, then my decision-making has to be aligned to that. Obviously, it's different from your profit-focused organization. So the point is, whatever board you go sit in, you've got to understand what its objective is so that you can make decisions around that. Not all board organizations are profit-focused, such as your for-profit organizations, your listed company organizations, etc. So when we do during our program, we focus more on the types of boards and really dive deep into the structures of each board, the compliance of all these type of boards, the level of compliance of all these boards. For example, the JSE listed board market is very compliant heavy, which is not so the case with your small business boards, though they have to also be compliant, but it's not as burdensome as a listed board, for example. Right, so what must you do to get a board seat? That is a very important question, because I do believe that all of us on this workshop have that desire to be a board member. So the question then becomes, what must I do to get a board seat? So I've listed a few things here that I think one can do to become a board member in the near future. And the first point there right at the top is the onus is on you, right? You need to take the initiative. You need to make the decision, I want to be a board member. And then you start channeling yourself to be able to become attractive in the market so that you can be chosen as a board member. So number one, very important, educate yourself about the board. I cannot stress this enough, the importance of just understanding generally how a board functions, right? A lot of organizations out there, a lot of boards, they want to employ individuals that already know what a quorum is. They already know what shareholder rights are. They already know the voting system. So they don't have to teach you, right? They don't have to put you through training once you have come on that board. So educate yourself, and you can do that various ways. A lot of colleges out there, universities, a lot of programs out there, like our program, Directors Association, which I'll speak on just now as soon as I've finished this section. And then gain board experience. That is key as well, especially you can do that through the SMME and NPO market. There are a lot of non-profit organizations and even SMMEs that are willing to take on your expertise, obviously without them paying you, but essentially you're volunteering. And that's a fantastic way to gain experience as a board member, especially in your earlier years. So I've always said, look, why don't you give 2 to 3 years serving on a non-paying board? That way, you're going to learn, you're going to gain experience, you're going to sharpen your tool, right? You're going to understand your craft, and you're going to develop your skill set, your authenticity as a board member, as Charmaine said earlier on. And that you can only do by serving on these boards. So 2 to 3 years, sit on boards voluntarily, not getting paid, gain that experience. Clean up your image, very important. A lot of boards, especially in the JSE listed markets, even state-owned entities, they do a lot of background checks, your tax and all these other issues, sort them out, make sure you've got a clean bill of health, for lack of a better word, so that you can not have anything that can hold you back in terms of your image, in terms of some of the things that you might have happened to you in the past. Tally your successes or accomplishments, that's very key as well, because board members are looking for individuals that can accomplish goals, that can accomplish things. So all of us have done, if you've got a career, you've got a professional career, you've accomplished a lot of things. So put that all in a CV, in a profile, including your social media. Make sure that it's up to the T. Make sure that when someone Googles your name, there you are. You come out, Munya Duvera, chairperson of this, director of that. You wanna create that brand around what you're trying to achieve. And then network. The director market is a very small market, right? It's network driven. So the more people you know, the better your chances of getting a board seat. So how you can do that? The next point then, join an association, like Directors Association or the other organizations out there that are in this, that provide similar services. That way, you will be able to meet people who have been directors, are currently directors. They can advise you, they can mentor you, and they can open doors for you. So if you really want to make it in this director market, you've got to put yourself out there. You cannot wait for board seats to come to you. That will not work. You've got to proactively go out, right, and say, this is what I want to do, knock on doors, join association, etc., so that you can get that opportunity. And then you can hire an executive search firm. There are a lot of companies out there, recruitment agencies that place directors. So you send them your CV, your profile, so they can actively look for board seat for you. Most of them, I'm sure they do pay some sort of an upfront fee, which might be the downside to it. And then, very importantly, be patient. Look, board seats don't come up every day, right? You can hear people serve on boards for 5, 10 years. So you've got to be patient as you look. It might take you a year even to find your first board seat. Some people even longer than a year. All you want to do is be ready for it, right? When it comes up, when opportunity strikes, you're ready. You've done your training. You've done your experience. You've got a good CV you've put together, and you're ready to sit on that board. And then after you get that board seat, serve effectively. The only way you can gain more board seats is by being effective on the board, being competent in discharging your duties. Very important. And obviously, continual learning is paramount. We never stop learning. We keep our ears and eyes in the governance world. And I'll give you a little tip. The way you sharpen your governance skills is to continuously watch the news. So whenever they're talking about the state capture inquiry and some of the judgments that are coming out there, or this Dudumieni thing, or the Steinhoff that's coming out, or any other story that comes out of the JSC and all these other organizations, read them, listen to them, and say, what does that mean from a governance perspective? Where was the board? What decision did the board make? Should they have made a different decision? That way, you're sharpening your skill set, you're sharpening your tools, so that when you find yourself in a similar scenario, you will always know to make the right decision. Okay, so I'm going to very briefly in the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm just going to speak around the programs that we have as Directors Association currently that are open and that we're offering to you as Bwasa members. So we've got 2 programs specifically, Professional Director Program and a Qualified Director Program. The difference being that depending on the stage you are at in your director career. The first one, Beginners Program, and this is for those individuals that have never sat on boards or have sat on boards but never went through formal board training, right? So they never really went through your actual company's act training, studying it, understanding it, doing case studies, doing exams, etc. So this is for those individuals who never sat on a board or have sat on a board but never went through formal board training. It consists of 5 steps, this program. These are the 5 steps. I know my slides are full of content, so don't worry if you can't read much of it. I'll just explain very briefly. So step number 1 is the theory training. And in this phase, we're covering all the topics that are on the right-hand side of the screen. So your corporate governance ethics, independent directorship, the role of the board, the King Code, strategy, compliance, Companies Act, reporting, committees, risk, stakeholder management, IT, basic financial literacy. All of those are theory training. And on the left-hand side there, you've got option A and option B. Option A is currently unavailable because of COVID. Option B, online training, is what we're doing and have been doing since around June. 5 webinar sessions, 3 hours each session, 1 session a week, spread over 5 weeks, totaling 5 weeks of theory training. So this is once a week, 3 hours long, over 5 weeks. And additionally, these are some of the additional topics we cover, which is soft skills related, leadership, business ethics, confidence, meeting agendas, etc., etc., etc. Step 2, an assessment phase. Director assessment, and this is based on the theory training. This is based on the 5 weeks that we've been training you on the Companies Act, on corporate governance, ethics, etc., etc. So we got 3 assessments that we give our candidates, 3 separate assessments. Number 1, it's an online governance exam, which is focused on directorship, boardship, membership, Companies Act, corporate governance, etc. Number 2, an online finance exam. As you can see, all these are online. And number 3, a corporate governance assignment, right? So the online governance exam, each individual is given a unique password. Whenever they're ready to write the exam, they click on it and the exam is there. It's multiple choice and it's 150 questions and the pass mark is 80%. Now, these 3 assessments, you're given 60 days to conclude these 3 assessments. So at any time that you want to go over them, anytime you want to sit down and write the assessments, the exams, you can do so. But you've got 60 days from the last day of the theory training. The last day on the 5th week, 60 days from that, you've got to complete the training. The finance though, the reason we have the finance training and the finance exam is because you can't be a board member and not understand the finances of the business. You need to be able to open up the financial statements, read them, understand them, and make informed decisions based on the current state, health, and performance of the business. So therefore, we offer a finance training, but it can be waived for those individuals that are finance professionals, right? Your chartered accountants, your professional accountants, etc. And or for those individuals that did some sort of finance, basic financial accounting whilst they were doing their, their degree or MBA, etc. So you just have to prove that you've done it and you've got your basic financial understanding. If not, then you've got to write the exam. If you don't have any finance background, then you've got to, we do give you an option of that finance training. And then the corporate governance assignments, essentially, we give you an organization that you must study, such as a sign-off. You write a report on what went wrong from its corporate governance perspective, and it's a 3 to 6 page report. Then there's a board practical, which is the step 3. And the purpose of this is really just to test your performance in a board setting. So what we'll do is we'll group our candidates into 4 to 6 to 7 board members. We give them a fictitious company with fictitious company results that we've created. We give you these in a board pack 7 days before that board meeting is to be held. And then you hold a board meeting and we will be analyzing your performance, your confidence, your contribution, how well you play with others, you speak to others, etc. This is not a pass or fail exercise, it's more of a feedback exercise so that we can tell you which areas you've got to improve on. That's step 3. And step 4 is the volunteer director program. And I think I spoke about this earlier on, is where we'll place you on an SMME or an NPO for the purposes of gaining experience. And this you do for up to 12 months. So it's a 12-month voluntary program when you're sitting on a board of our choosing for the sake of experience. You are not going to appear on the company document, so you're not necessarily a director according to the Companies Act. You are a board member, an advisory board member, if you will, using that dual structure that we spoke about earlier on. And then after that, we put you in our database. You're ready now to be placed in the paying board market, and we start proactively as Directors Association looking for board seats for you. So are there any questions thus far on this beginners program? Feel free to type in the chat box, yes, and then I can answer them. Okay, so I guess whilst people are typing, okay, there's one. How much does it cost? There we go, all right. So the fee is 12,500 for the entire program. And the optional basic finance training program is 6,000. But with the discounts that we have and the partnership we've got with Bwasa, sorry, I'm just going to look for the slide that shows the amounts and the discounts. Okay, I don't have it here. I should have it here. Okay, so the partnership we have with Bwasa is that we're giving us 64% discount. So all you pay is actually 4,920 rand for 4,920, and it can also be split over 3 months. We do accept installments. So that's a discount that we have currently for our online program. And as a Bwasa member, it is available to you. So I think what we'll do, I'm going to speak to Mandisa. I don't know, maybe, she'll send emails to everyone that joined this program in terms of what you can do if you want to get more information around joining the program, invoicing, etc. But there is, as I said, an 8,000 rand discount. So all you're paying is 4,500 and then 420 rand for the textbook. So you pay 4,920 instead of the 12.5. Yeah. Yes, someone's asked, what is your network of JSE companies for placement? So as I said earlier on, our JSE listed placement is not as active as the small businesses and non-profits and mid-sized businesses, because our approach and our target market, which is first-time directors, doesn't necessarily allow us to place our members on listed boards. Most of our members don't have the experience to serve on listed boards. So therefore, in our strategy, as we grow with our members, in 2-3 years' time, our members will be ready to serve on listed boards. And we've made this conscious decision to focus on that market and grow with them, rather than to take outsiders who are not our members and place them on this listed board. So we are really focused on developing our members. That's why we only place our members. Even if you want placement, you got to join Writers Association for us to give you those board opportunities. And as I said, because right now we're not, our members don't qualify yet for JSE market, we are not active in the JSE market. If you're looking for JSE market opportunities, I would advise you go to other organizations like IUD, where they're really strong in the listed market. In 5 years' time, definitely will be there as well. When does the program start is what Masetedi has said. So we have intake on a monthly basis. So we've got intake. So we've got a schedule that we've created for up to the end of the year. So the information that Mandisa is going to send to all of you, or I don't know, I'll hear from her. Maybe you can contact us directly. I'm not sure how that'll work. We will give a schedule for the rest of the year, so you can actually decide when you want to join the program, be it September, October, November, or December. Is there any associate membership where one does not need training but just association? Yes, definitely. So we have members that have had prior director training through either any of the other organizations out there. All we do is just assess that training that you have. If it fits our competency levels, then you skip the entire training and you're just a member. And you have the same benefits as any other member, just don't go through the training. So that definitely is something we provide. Sarah is saying, I highly recommend and endorse this program. Well, thanks, Sarah. Sarah went through our program. I recommend and endorse this program. Its contribution to my personal development as a founder and director of my company has no price tag. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. I don't know. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly go through my last slide, and I'll so that I can finish, and then we've got 2 minutes before Mandisa comes back in. Then we've got an advanced program, and this is for those individuals that want to sit now on listed boards. And as I said, we're not yet so active in this market yet. So really, what we're looking at, our current members that we've been training, most of them will be eligible for this program in about a year or so. Because for you to go through the advanced program, you've got to have gone through the beginners and served on a board for at least 2 years. And these are some of the topics that we cover. We have created the program. We have, do training once in a while for it, but it's not as active. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we focus on those type of financial markets, listing requirements, integrated reporting, equity, share structures, etc., etc. So this is for the listed market rather than the beginners market. Okay. There we go. Is the certification recognized by IOD? No, because remember, we're not IOD, so our certification is not Do they recognize it? I hope they do. I'm not sure. I've never really spoken to them about it. But yeah, maybe not, if they recognize it. Mandisa?
Thank you so much, Munya. I'm having technology difficulties on the side. Thank you so much to yourself and the team for this very empowering session, even for myself. It's not only opened up my eyes as a person that runs her own business as well, but also as a person that serves on an NPO, the importance of actually knowing what you're doing. So it's not just about having the nice title, but the responsibility that comes with being a board member, the responsibility of your own personal brand. I mean, I was really touched by Charmaine when she opened up and spoke about your own personal branding, because it's not just about sitting on any board, but it's about sitting on board where you know that you can make a personal contribution and you can help somebody else's business, especially if you choose to sit on an SME board. It's not just about being there and ticking the box, but it's understanding that this person is building a business and they need people that can give advice. They need people that are actually have vested interest in their businesses as well. So I want to thank you and our partners this evening for this very informative session. I want to thank all the attendees for being here this evening and sitting through 3 hours. I think it shows the commitment that we have as women to make the change. I'd like to paraphrase briefly Viola Davis when she says the only thing that separates women of color is opportunity from other people. But I'd like to say this evening that the only thing that separates us women from men in boardrooms, from men in corporate South Africa, is the opportunities that we choose to go for, is the opportunities that we believe we deserve. No one is going to hand us anything. No one is going to place all these things on a silver platter. So we actually need to go out there and make sure that we are able to take up the seats. The seats are available, we just need to take them up. So I want to thank you, Charmaine. I want to thank you, Trudie, as well, for breaking down the judgment in detail, because I'm sure some of us that saw it on the news, we automatically veered off to the idea that she was being a scapegoat for somebody else without fully understanding how you get to a judgment where a director is considered delinquent. So thank you for breaking it down and empowering us that one day when you are on that seat and you are that chairperson, you know exactly what you need to do to avoid getting yourself into that situation. So I'd like to thank you this evening for a very empowering session. For the attendees, very importantly, in order to qualify for the discount that Munya so graciously offered us, I will send you our email. It's gauteng@bwasa.co.za, but I'll send an email to everybody so that you are able to sign up to be part of the Business Women's Association. So briefly, from a Business Women's Association point of view, for those that don't know, it is the longest standing women's association for business and women in corporate South Africa. Our main role is to advocate for women's rights in the business and corporate space, to create opportunities like this where we partner with partners such as the Directors Association and other partners in the market, and we share the knowledge that you need as a woman in corporate South Africa and as a woman in business to be able to make the change that the world so deserves. I'm sure we've seen the comparative country statistics for countries that are led by women with COVID versus countries that are led by men. The world is waiting for us, ladies. We just need to actually go out there and get it. So from us, from Bwasa, Gauteng, from Bwasa National, and I'm sure our national president and the National Executive Committee have been supporting us in this journey. We would like to say thank you so much to the Directors Association. We'd also like to say thank you so much to our technical partner, Hyber Group South Africa, for being part of the session and making sure that we are able to bring this information to you. And I personally like to say thank you to Eskom. I was supposed to be load shedded. The session was going to be cut off, but thank you to Eskom for allowing us to get to our 7 o'clock mark. We will be sharing all the information via email to everybody that registered. Everyone else that viewed on Facebook, please visit us on our social media channels, and also visit us on www.womensmonth.co.za, where you can get more information. And if you missed the session, or there's key parts of the session that you missed, it will be broadcast on our Facebook and on our YouTube page, and Directors Association would also put it up on their YouTube page. Just from a Bwasa announcement point of view, to wrap up Women's Month, we'll be hosting a advocacy session next week Tuesday on the 25th, starting at 6 o'clock. Very importantly, from an advocacy point of view, and it's something that Charmaine also touched on, is that as women, we wear so many hats, and we also are faced with so many types of oppression. So part of the advocacy conversation that we are having next week is talking about gender parity in the workplace, talking about gender parity in society in general, and specifically drilling in on gender-based violence in the places of work. Gender-based violence in the places where we run our businesses, in the places where we sit on those board seats, and how we are able to address those issues. So please join us next week, Tuesday, as we talk about how we ourselves can take the responsibility of making sure that we know that it's not okay to allow these things to happen. I'm sure we've seen or experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, but how then do we make sure that this actually starts to change, and government and private sector can start taking this more seriously? So please join us next week, Tuesday at 6 o'clock, same place, same time. Visit our social media pages. And again, thank you so much. Thank you to our attendees. I trust that the session was very informative for you. If there are any other questions, feel free to email them to us at gauteng@bwasa.co.za, and we'll ensure that Charmaine, Trudie, and Munya are able to field those questions back to you. And as for me, I would like to say it's a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you.